Ned Stark arrived in King's Landing with a heaviness in his heart, but he wore his sense of duty like a shield. The noise of the city crashed over him in waves. Cries from the street vendors, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the hurried footsteps of messengers trying to outrun time. At first, he remembered Winterfell's quiet cold where each footstep in snow was softer than any murmur of the king's court. But duty demanded he leave the wolf's den behind and stand in the lion's den instead. He promised Robert, his old friend, that he would serve as hand of the king. He had promised to protect the realm if he could. He had promised to do what was right. From the moment he crossed the Red Keep's gates, he felt the place was riddled with secrets. The city itself reeked of ambition, and each corridor within the palace seemed to echo with unspoken conspiracies. As he walked through the lushly furnished hallways, trailing a line of Winterfell retainers behind him, he sensed the weight of eyes on his back. The Lannisters had eyes everywhere, or so he suspected, and after all, this was their territory more than it was the Baratheons. King Robert might wear the crown, but the gold that supported it came, in large part, from Casterly Rock. Yet Ned's footsteps did not waver. This time, he had decided that he must choose a path more subtle than confrontation. He remembered all too well the bloodshed that had followed in Robert's rebellion, when Tywin Lannister had sacked King's Landing in the name of the new king, but cunningly ensured his family's place at the seat of power. If Ned was honest with himself, he disliked the Lannisters. He disliked their arrogance, their ostentatious display of wealth, and, more than anything else, the dishonorable rumors that seemed to trail in their wake. Still, he reminded himself that he could not yield to righteous anger if he hoped to protect his family, to honor the promise he had made to keep the peace. He was greeted by the Master of Protocol and escorted into a receiving hall where Cersei Lannister waited, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk. Ser Jaime Lannister stood nearby, clad in the Kingsguard's white. He leaned against a tall pillar, an unreadable expression on his handsome face. A few other courtiers flitted about. Ned felt, for a moment, like he was being presented for judgment rather than welcomed. He bowed to the Queen, remembering that, for all her pride and cunning, she was Robert's wife. "Lord Eddard," she intoned, dipping her head with the faintest hint of courtesy. "King Robert has prepared a feast in your honor this evening, but until then, he's asked that you make yourself at home here in the Red Keep. We trust you had a pleasant journey from the north." He returned a stiff bow. "Your Grace, the journey was long but safe. I thank King Robert for his hospitality. I look forward to serving him and the realm." She studied him for an instant, as if she meant to pluck the truth from the lines in his brow. "We hope so indeed, Lord Stark," she said lightly. Jaime made an offhand remark about the staleness of the city air compared to the north, but Ned let it pass. It was Cersei's mood he was trying to gauge, and he could see that she was content to maintain a veneer of politeness. He decided he would do the same, at least for now. Inwardly, he braced himself for the next move in this peculiar dance. Though he loathed the idea of politics, he recognized that a blade could come in many forms. Diplomacy might shield him from an immediate confrontation with the Lannisters. If he was too blunt, if he challenged them openly the way he had once intended, he might seal both his fate and the fate of his loved ones in a single stroke. He found Robert in the courtyard, whacking a training dummy with a blunted sword. The king's face was red and sweaty beneath his bushy beard, and he let out bellowing laughs each time he struck. Around him stood a circle of onlookers, some lords from minor houses, some gold cloaks, and a few curious retainers who relished the chance to watch the king's latest attempt at reliving his glory days on the battlefield. When the king spotted Ned, he flung away the practiced sword and hurried over, arms outstretched. "Ned, finally, I can sleep easier at night knowing I have my old friend by my side again." He clasped Ned's shoulders in a warm greeting. It was the warmth of a man who still thought more of the battlefield than the throne room. "I trust Cersei's made you comfortable? That woman can be... well, you know." Ned nodded, careful to keep an even tone. "She was gracious, Your Grace. The accommodations are more than sufficient for me and my family." Robert wrinkled his nose in dissatisfaction. seemingly disappointed by the formality of Ned's reply. The king preferred jests and japes over careful neutrality, but Ned would not indulge him now. Not on this first day. He had too much to learn about the city's mood and about the Lannisters' intentions. Still, Robert dismissed the tension with a wave of his hand. "Ah, you'll settle in soon enough. Come, let's drink." No matter how many years passed, Robert's love for feasting and ale never diminished. He ushered Ned into his solar where, as promised, he broke out the strong wine and cups of gold and silver. As the king drank with the fervor of a man trying to chase away ghosts, Ned sipped slowly, scanning the tapestries on the walls and the table scattered with documents and ledgers. The business of the realm was in shambles. Robert's style of rule had run up astronomical debts, and half the lords in the 7 kingdoms were angling for advantage. But if Ned had come here to untangle that knot, he needed patience. He decided to broach matters carefully. "Your Grace, once I've had a look at the ledgers and spoken to your council, I'll see what I can do to shore up the realm's finances. Seems the crown is—" "Bah!" Robert made a dismissive gesture, but not unkindly. "All of that can wait until tomorrow or the next day. You've only just arrived. I want you fresh for the feast. Then yes, you can read the ledgers, meet with John Aaron's old stewards, do the dull things men like us never wanted to do when we were young." He smiled wistfully as though recalling their old battles side by side. "And Ned, be mindful around the Lannisters. I'd rather not have to choose between you and them if it comes to that." Ned's heart tightened, so Robert saw it as inevitable that Ned might find conflict with the Lions of the West. But conflict could be postponed, if not averted entirely, with the right approach. "I'll heed your words," he said simply. Despite the heaviness in the air, Robert's boisterous presence soon took over. By the time the feast began that evening, Ned could not help but feel a cautious optimism. Perhaps with diplomacy and composure, he could keep the realm intact and guard against the Lannisters' potential treachery. Perhaps he might even discover the truth behind John Aaron's death. At the high table in the grand hall, torches burned bright, illuminating the king in his finery and the queen at his side. Ned sat near them as was expected of the hand. The crowd was thick with lords and ladies, many wearing their house colors. In the front rows, Ned spotted Sansa and Arya, seated with Septa Mordain, while Jory Castle stood behind them protectively. Sansa glowed with excitement, delighted by the pageantry. Arya, on the other hand, wore the bored look of a child who would rather be chasing cats through the courtyard. The feast unfolded with fanfare. Roasted boar, fresh baked bread, lemon cakes, overflowing cups of wine. Jugglers and singers took turns entertaining the crowd, while a pair of dwarfs acted out a comic pantomime. Ned only half listened, eyes drifting across the hall until they settled on the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister was not present. He remained in the west, presumably attending to matters of gold and governance. But Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion Lannister were all gathered. Tyrion, the dwarf known as the Imp, sat a few seats away from his siblings, wearing an expression of guarded amusement. Jaime lounged in his seat, as though the entire feast was a spectacle meant for his personal enjoyment. Now and then, Ned caught Cersei glancing his way. Their eyes met for a split second, and a silent exchange flickered. He understood she was judging him, trying to read whether his presence threatened her family's position. Once, he saw her turn to whisper something in Jaime's ear, though the Kingslayer made no reaction beyond a lazy smile. When the court musician began a new ballad, something praising the glory of House Baratheon, Robert took the chance to engage Ned in conversation again. "You remember that night in the Vale? The feast at the Eyrie, after John Arryn bested Lord Belmore in the tourney?" The king let out a rumbling laugh. "You were so sullen you barely touched your drink, and I asked you if the cold in your bones wouldn't let you dance. You said, well, do you remember what you said?" "I believe I said I was not much for dancing, Your Grace," Ned answered with a small smile. "And it's still true, though I've learned to step carefully enough these days." Robert snorted. "Step carefully, yes. You always were a cautious one, except in war. In war, You were as fierce as any man I've known." He clapped Ned on the shoulder. "Just don't let your caution keep you from spotting the knives in the dark." Ned knew that was the crux of it. On this path, caution could save him, but it could also blind him if he forgot that betrayal often came clothed in courtesy. So, when the toast was called in honor of the new hand of the king, Ned stood, raised his goblet, and offered a measured smile. "To King Robert and Queen Cersei, for their generous welcome. May the Seven bless this union and the realm." He felt the attention of the hall shift to him in that moment, to see if the reticent wolf from the north would offer more than a cold salute. He let his voice resonate, forced a warmth into it that he did not entirely feel. "I am honored to serve as hand. May our efforts together bring peace and prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms." He noted how Cersei inclined her head, a faint smirk dancing on her lips, a silent acknowledgement that she, too, would play her role in this dance. That night, after the feast concluded, Ned retired to his chambers. He paced across the floor, ignoring the sumptuous tapestries, the velvet drapes, the gilded furniture that seemed too fine for a man accustomed to Winterfell's stark simplicity. Varys had visited him briefly, as had Peter Baelish, each offering cryptic remarks about the nature of the court. Littlefinger, as sly as ever, gave him a cunning smile and suggested that, as Hand of the King, my lord, you must keep your friends close and your foes closer. Though he wouldn't clarify precisely who fell into which category, Ned had lost count of the times he heard warnings about the Lannisters' cunning. Every rumor said the Lannisters were plotting to ensure that the power of the Iron Throne truly lay in their hands. But he also recalled something else. People so rarely simply admit their guilt if confronted directly. Accusing Cersei and Jaime of treason without proof would be as good as throwing a torch into a barrel of wildfire. A more diplomatic approach might show him the truth, or at least help him navigate these dangerous waters. So, in a departure from his usual straightforward manner, Ned set aside his immediate desire to question them about the circumstances of Jon Arryn's death. If Jon had discovered something damning, Ned would gather proof quietly, carefully. He would wear the mask of courtesy, ensure that any potential ally remained open to him. Only then, when he had the truth, would he act. He awoke early the next day, determined to get a start on the tasks before him. He strode into the council chamber where Lord Renly, Grand Maester Pycelle, Peter Baelish, and Varys waited. All of them rose for the new hand, offering bows or polite nods. Ned was not naive. He knew each man had ambitions and secrets of his own. But the realm needed them all to be at least functionally united. Ned took his seat at the table's head, with the king's seat empty at the far end, an ornate monstrosity of carved wood and gold. "We have much work," Ned began, voice calm, betraying no discomfort. "I've requested the ledgers. I want to see where the debts lie, how deeply we owe, and I want any notes Jon Arryn left behind. I'll not let his efforts go to waste." Baelish steepled his fingers. "Ah yes, the crown's finances. Quite the riddle, my lord. You'll see that we owe the Iron Bank, the Lannisters, and more than a few Tyroshi bankers. Paying them back is another matter. Perhaps we can discuss ways to restructure some of the debt." His tone was smooth, with that undercurrent of mischief he always carried. Before Ned could respond, Pycelle cleared his throat, a ponderous sound from an old man who enjoyed hearing his own voice. Indeed, indeed. Lord Arryn was quite methodical in his approach, but the poor man grew distracted in his final days. He spent much time reading old records, paying visits to the city's armorer, and, if I'm not mistaken, speaking to Lord Stannis on certain matters. All, I fear, quite mysterious. Ned latched onto that piece of information. Lord Stannis? I trust he returned to Dragonstone not long before Lord Arryn's death. Indeed, my lord. He left quite suddenly, as if disturbed by something, Pycelle replied, though he never confided in me personally. Across the table, Varys offered a soft smile. Lord Stannis is not known for confiding in many, but we might glean more if the hand were to send a letter requesting his presence. Yes? Ned weighed the idea. He still was not certain who might be reading his letters, or intercepting them. If Stannis had discovered the same secret that Jon Arryn had, and if that secret threatened the Lannisters, then sending a letter might alert exactly the wrong people. But neither could he leave that stone unturned. "I'll consider it," he replied gently. "For now, I'd prefer to know more about Lord Arryn's final inquiries here in the city. I understand he was in search of a certain book in the archives. Was he not?" Peter Baelish's eyes flickered. "Ah, the lineages and histories of the great houses, I believe. Musty old tome. One wonders why the good Lord Arryn would need to bury himself in genealogies." Ned hid his sudden interest behind a neutral expression. "Indeed," he said quietly. "I'll have a look at that book when time allows." He allowed the conversation to move on to petty disputes in the city, plans for an upcoming tourney, and other matters of state. Yet all the while, in his mind, he weighed how best to approach the Lannisters themselves. If Jon Arryn had stumbled on something about their line, was it possible that they were behind his death? Or was it sickness, as Pycelle so often claimed? Ned suspected the former, but suspicion alone was a poor guard for his own neck. The days passed. He settled into a routine of reviewing documents, meeting with the council, and speaking to the people within the city to gather clues. Where he might once have openly challenged the Queen, he now spoke to her with carefully measured respect. Where he might have accused Jaime of arrogance, he now nodded politely in passing. He knew that each day he was sowing an image of respectful caution, an image that might keep the Lannisters from acting against him prematurely. Cersei occasionally crossed his path in the courtyard or in the council halls, always dressed in her best finery, always with her regal chin held high. The Queen rarely missed a chance to remind the courtiers that the power of the Iron Throne flowed, in some measure, through her. And yet she, too, maintained civility with Ned. She would comment on the North or on Sansa's progress, or she would inquire how he found the city's air. Sometimes the conversation was innocuous. Sometimes it was laced with subtle barbs. But never did she openly clash with him. Ned suspected that she was waiting, watching. If she realized he suspected her of something, she gave no sign of it. Tyrion Lannister, on the other hand, turned out to be an interesting ally, or at least an interesting distraction. The imp visited Ned one afternoon in the library, where the hand was quietly scanning through the lineages and histories of the great houses. Tyrion's uneven gait and sharp grin announced his presence. He was not a man who could slip through a crowd unnoticed. "My Lord Stark, so diligent in study. I've always said that when one lacks height, one compensates with knowledge. But you, on the other hand, what knowledge do you seek in these dusty books?" Tyrion had that mocking, genial tone that could be friendly or hostile, depending on one's perspective. Ned closed the book carefully. "Just familiarizing myself with matters of the realm," he replied in a neutral voice, giving nothing away. "Jon Arryn was reading these as well. I thought I might find some insight. Knowledge is never wasted. Wouldn't you agree?" Tyrion arched a curious eyebrow. "Oh, certainly. But I do wonder if you search for knowledge that would better remain undiscovered. The truth, after all, can be a dangerous thing if the wrong people learn you have it." Ned did not rise to the bait. "Indeed, Lord Tyrion. And one wonders who those wrong people might be." With a grin, the imp shrugged. "Oh, the realm is full of them, I assure you. Hardly a day goes by in King's Landing without some rumor or another. It would be a pity if the new hand fell victim to the same perils as his predecessor." He paused, studying Ned's face. "I for one hope you don't. I find you less tiresome than most." The faintest flicker of a smile touched Ned's lips. Tyrion was not exactly an ally, but there was a bluntness in his words that Ned almost appreciated. "I hope I don't either. Thank you for the advice, Lord Tyrion." Tyrion gave a little bow and departed, leaving Ned to wonder. Was that a warning on behalf of House Lannister or a personal sentiment? Tyrion, if the rumors were true, was not the most beloved son in his family. Perhaps he was just curious, or perhaps he genuinely wanted to steer Ned away from direct conflict. Regardless, Ned decided to keep to his plan. Gather the truth slowly, quietly, maintain a show of courtesy, and keep the peace as best he could. If the day came that he had to reveal what he knew, it would be on his own terms. Time wove onward, and Ned gradually collected small pieces of the puzzle John Arryn had left behind. He learned that John had visited a blacksmith's apprentice, a boy with dark hair and a strong jaw who bore a surprising resemblance to King Robert. He discovered that John had been investigating the lineage of many houses, focusing on hair color and other traits. He read the genealogies thoroughly, noticing the pattern. Whenever a Baratheon and a Lannister had children, the golden hair of the Lannisters seemed to dominate, until Robert's supposed children came along, and all of them turned out fair-haired like their mother. The revelation struck Ned to his core. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen bore no resemblance to Robert. If the pattern in the book was correct, they should have all had Robert's dark Baratheon hair. Instead, they were undeniably blonde like the Lannisters. This was what John Arryn had discovered. This was the secret that might have led to his demise. The children were not Robert's at all. They were bastards born of incest between Cersei and Jaime. The full weight of it bore down on him. It confirmed everything he had suspected about the Queen and her brother. It meant the entire succession was a lie. If Robert learned the truth, war could erupt. Tywin Lannister would never let such an accusation pass unanswered. And Robert, he might demand blood for the deception, or lose himself in a drunken rage that would tear the realm apart. Ned recalled the promise he had made to keep the realm safe. If he handled this revelation recklessly, it could plunge the Seven Kingdoms into chaos. So instead of rushing to Robert, brandishing accusations, Ned steeled his heart and decided upon a more diplomatic approach. He could not keep the secret forever, but perhaps he could use it to carefully guide the realm away from outright war. If the truth must come out, it should come out in a way that did not destroy everything. Summer's heat grew heavy in the capital, and tensions simmered just beneath the surface. Rumors flew through the streets, whispers of the king's drunken outbursts, of the Lannisters' watchful eyes, of the new hand's quiet inquiries. Ned heard them all but revealed nothing. Each day he grew more certain of the incest. Each day he prayed to the old gods for guidance. He was not made for politics, but for the sake of his family and the realm, he forced himself to adapt. At last, an opportunity presented itself. Robert, in a fit of good humor after a victory at the melee in the tourney, summoned the small council and included the Queen at the meeting as well. Cersei arrived in a swirl of green silk, with Jaime trailing her, though the Kingslayer was not officially on the council. The presence of both Lannisters set the tension in the air. Ned, seated near the king, had to keep his composure as he faced them across the table. The topic at hand concerned the tensions with House Tully over certain border disputes, and Robert, already half distracted, looked to Ned for guidance. Ned spoke calmly, aware that the Lannisters studied his every word. "With your leave, your grace, it might be wise to send an envoy to Riverrun, to clarify the matter with Lord Hoster Tully. A show of respect could prevent a more serious conflict." Cersei tilted her head. "A show of respect indeed. And how would you suggest we clarify these matters? By coddling them? I doubt House Tully would yield so easily. Sometimes, force is more convincing." Ned met her gaze with measured neutrality. "Force is costly, your grace. With diplomacy, we might avoid a needless skirmish. The realm already struggles with debts. Adding the cost of a campaign would be unwise." Jaime, who stood behind Cersei, chimed in. "But sometimes a campaign is exactly what's needed to remind the lords that the Iron Throne does not negotiate from weakness." There it was, the pressure from the Lannisters to show strength, or perhaps to escalate tensions in a way that would advantage them. Ned thought quickly. He remembered that Tywin Lannister had once famously used overwhelming force to settle petty disputes. It was their way, rule through fear or at least the threat of it. But Ned pressed on with calm logic, never letting his frustration show. "We do not negotiate from weakness, Ser Jaime. If we approach this from a position of honor and reason, we show that the king's justice is not arbitrary. That, in itself, is a type of strength." Robert, blowing out a breath, seemed relieved that someone would do the thinking for him. "Enough, enough. I can't be bothered with more war, not right now. Let's send an envoy, see what Tully wants. If he's being stubborn, we'll do as Ned says." Gods know we can't afford another conflict over trifles. Cersei's emerald eyes flashed, but she pasted on a thin smile. As you wish, Your Grace. It was a small triumph for Ned, keeping the peace in this matter, at least for the moment. Yet it also reminded him how precarious his position was. The Lannisters, though discomfited, would not forget who had stood in the way of their preferred approach. The chance to confront Cersei alone came soon after. She crossed paths with Ned in the gardens just before dusk, while the breeze carried the scents of flowers and the hush of crickets. She wore a robe of purple silk, her hair braided with gold ribbons. She seemed almost tranquil in that moment, though Ned suspected it was but another mask. "My Lord Hand," she greeted in a cool voice. "Your Grace," Ned answered, inclining his head politely. They walked together among the rose bushes, an unlikely pairing of wolf and lion. "I've noticed your approach to matters of state," she began, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You value caution and courtesy. It's a change from what I've heard of you in the rebellion, when you were quite decisive in war." Ned felt her testing him. "War and governance are different beasts, Your Grace," he said. "Sometimes, rashness in governance leads to ruin." Her lips quirked in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Indeed, we wouldn't want that, would we? Yet sometimes caution can look like weakness. The realm can be restless. When the wolves do not show their teeth, the lions feel emboldened. Or so the story goes." They paused by a low stone wall draped in flowering vines. Ned folded his hands behind his back. "Better for the wolves and lions to keep peace, don't you think? After all, if they tear each other apart, the rest of the kingdom suffers as well." Cersei turned to face him fully, her chin lifting. "I wonder if you truly believe that, or if you're simply trying to keep your head down until you find a way to strike." Ned met her gaze. "Your Grace, I'm here to serve the king and the realm, not to strike anyone unless I am forced to." The Queen held his stare a moment longer, then turned gracefully away. "Perhaps. You impress me, Lord Stark, though I can't say I entirely trust you. But then again, I trust very few." That was the truth. He heard it in her voice. He recognized her fierce loyalty to those she considered hers. Her children, certainly, and Jaime by extension. He wondered if she sensed that he was on the edge of discovering their secret. Yet she gave him no direct sign, and he was determined not to reveal any suspicion. He would keep the realm's peace. He would not let Robert be manipulated so easily. They parted in silence, the garden's perfume lingering behind them. Ned realized his hands were trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from the tension of speaking so carefully with the Queen he suspected of high treason. He took a deep breath and composed himself. Diplomacy, he reminded himself. Keep the secrets close until there is a plan to handle the consequences. Letters from Stannis Baratheon arrived only in the form of curt replies. The Lord of Dragonstone would not be attending King's Landing anytime soon, stating pressing duties on his island fortress. That raised Ned's suspicions further. If Stannis had discovered the truth, perhaps he left to plan his own move. Or perhaps he feared the Lannisters would kill him as well. Regardless, Ned found himself carrying the burden alone. He could not confide in Robert without risking an immediate and possibly disastrous confrontation. He could not approach Cersei openly, nor could he remain silent forever. The question was, how to use this knowledge to ensure an orderly succession, or at least to keep the realm from fracturing. If the children were not Robert's, then the rightful heir might be Stannis, a hard and humorless man, but honest in his own rigid way. What if there was a path to handle this that avoided bloodshed? If Ned could persuade the Queen to step aside quietly, or if he could orchestrate some arrangement that recognized the true succession without forcing the realm into war. But that seemed a fool's hope. The Lannisters were not the type to relinquish power meekly. Still, part of him, the part that recalled the vow he had made to Robert and to the dead Jon Arryn, felt it was his duty to warn the Queen first, to give her a chance to flee. In the canon of his personal honor, giving her the option to save herself and her children from Robert's wrath was the moral path. He had once resolved to do just that. But was that wise now? He wrestled with the question for days. Winterfell's godswood was far away, and the Heart Tree's eyes could not give him counsel here. But he knew what the Honorable Ned Stark would do. He would offer the Queen the chance to remove herself, to protect her children from the King's retribution. He would do so with dignity, expecting that justice required some measure of mercy. Yet this was King's Landing. This was the place where honor and justice so easily became weakness. Perhaps there was a middle road, a way to speak to Cersei, to reveal that he knew without demanding her immediate downfall, a chance to gauge her reaction, see if she might propose a peaceful solution. He doubted it, but maybe, just maybe, she would fear exposure enough to strike a compromise. He asked Cersei for a private audience, specifying that he wished to speak about sensitive matters of state. She agreed, but insisted on meeting in her solar rather than his. Ned acquiesced, though he understood the risk. Within her domain, she held the advantage. He arrived at midday, leaving his guards stationed outside. He was sure her own men waited in the corridor, but that was inevitable. Seated across from her at a small table bearing fruit and chilled wine, Ned felt the tension coil in his chest. Cersei took a sip of the wine before speaking. "So, Lord Hand, what is it that requires such discretion?" Ned exhaled slowly. "I have uncovered certain irregularities regarding the succession. With respect, Your Grace, I believe Lord Arryn stumbled on the same facts before his death." Her spine went rigid. Her green eyes bored into his. He saw her knuckles tighten around the stem of her cup. "Go on." He chose his words with care. "I have reason to believe that the children, Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, Prince Tommen, bear traits that do not align with King Robert's line. The Lannister blood, it seems, runs too thick." Silence. A heartbeat of time that felt like an eternity. Then Cersei placed her cup down with deliberate precision. "I see Jon Arryn taught you well," she said softly, voice as cold as a blade. "And do you now intend to inform Robert of these suspicions, Lord Stark?" Ned kept his tone level. "I have not informed him yet. I am here, speaking with you, precisely because I do not wish to bring ruin upon the realm, or upon innocent children. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, they are not to blame for the circumstances of their birth." He saw her eyes flash with anger. "How noble of you. Still, that doesn't answer my question. What do you plan to do with your precious knowledge, if not use it to destroy me and my children?" His next words came out steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. "I want no war. I want no bloodshed. But the truth cannot be buried forever. If I keep it from Robert indefinitely, we both know it will surface. Perhaps from another source, perhaps at a worse time. The consequences would be far more catastrophic." She rose abruptly, pacing along the windowsill, her robe swirling around her ankles like a storm cloud. He watched the tension in her posture, the subtle tremor in her jaw. "You say you don't want war, yet you hold the power to ignite it in your hands. What do you expect me to do? Confess and let Robert kill us all?" Ned forced himself to remain seated, to keep his voice calm. "I don't think Robert would kill your children. He is many things, but not so monstrous. Even so, I see your predicament. That is why I'm here, speaking to you directly. If there is a way to avert violence, I will find it. But I need your cooperation, or else we court disaster." She turned to him, her face a mask of proud defiance. "Disaster is what you threaten me with? And now you ask for my cooperation?" Ned took a moment to weigh his reply. He thought of his wife, Catelyn, and their children back in the Red Keep. If this conversation went poorly, if Cersei decided to strike first, everything could spiral beyond control. Yet he refused to be cowed. "I speak to you as a father, as a man who would protect his children if he could. This realm does not need another war. Look at how Robert's rebellion tore us apart once already. The Targaryens are gone, but if the houses turn on each other again..." Cersei gave a short, humorless laugh. "You don't understand the Lannisters if you think we'll relinquish our hold on power so tamely. My father is not a man to stand idle while our name is cast into infamy. I have done what I must to secure my family's place." She paused, her eyes searching Ned's face. "I see in you a certain softness, a desire for mercy. That softness might be your undoing. Ned inclined his head. Perhaps. But if you speak of your father, you must know Tywin Lannister would measure the cost of war just as carefully. Gold can buy armies, but war can cost even more gold and far more blood. He might yet be persuaded that a peaceful settlement is preferable. For a moment, she seemed on the brink of retort, but then her expression shifted. A flicker of desperation crossed her face, so brief that Ned nearly missed it. You presume a great deal about my father. If he knew you were confronting me like this, do you think he'd let you leave King's Landing alive? I'm certain he would weigh all the outcomes first, Ned replied quietly. And in the meantime, as long as Robert remains on the throne, neither of us can act with outright hostility. If war breaks out, who truly wins? The Targaryen pretender across the sea? The Tyrells or Martells, seeking revenge for old wounds? War will only invite opportunists to tear us all apart. She considered his words, lips pressed thin. So you propose we do what? Keep this secret while we negotiate terms? You want me to go to Robert and say, yes, I betrayed you, but let's remain cordial for the good of the realm? He'd tear my head from my shoulders. Ned's expression softened. I don't expect a confession, not yet. But if you and your children left King's Landing quietly, if you returned to Casterly Rock or found refuge somewhere else, you might avoid Robert's initial wrath. Perhaps that is how we can avoid open war. I would inform Robert in a way that does not incite him to madness. He would have time to calm his fury before he could do anything rash. She was silent, a series of emotions passing over her features. Horror, anger, pride, sorrow, and finally a cold resolve. Leave King's Landing? Abandon the throne? You ask me to tear my son away from everything he's ever known. You ask me to break the betrothal with your precious daughter Sansa. No doubt. And to sever our hold on the Iron Throne. Ned bowed his head. It may be the only way to avoid bloodshed, Your Grace. In time, if the realm is stabilized, you might petition for some arrangement, some formal acknowledgement of your children's station, though not as heirs. It would be more than they'd receive if Robert discovered this on his own and demanded their heads. Her eyes burned with tears, but they did not fall. And what of Jaime? Would you have him cast aside his white cloak and flee with us? He is sworn to protect the king. At that, Ned said nothing for a moment. Jaime must decide for himself. I speak only of a path that might save countless lives. The alternative is to wait until the truth explodes in your face. You know how Robert can be, how Tywin can be. If the realm is forced to pick sides, we'll see war at every border. This is not a threat. It's the reality of what we face. Cersei's jaw tightened. The gold in her hair seemed to blaze with the last of the afternoon's sunlight. At length, she composed herself enough to speak. You are a fool, Lord Stark, an honorable fool. But part of me wishes I could believe in your solution. Do you honestly think my father would yield? That Robert would allow me to simply walk away? Ned rose from his seat slowly, determined to maintain an air of calm. I cannot predict all outcomes, but I know that war would be worse. You must know that too. If you cannot or will not consider this offer, then the realm will pay the price. She studied him with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. I hear your words, but I cannot promise anything. I'll speak with my brother. I'll consider what is best for my children. But do not assume you can move me like a piece on your board. I don't assume that, Ned replied. I only hope the Queen has enough love for her children, and for the realm to avoid madness. Her retort was laced with venom, but also a strange softness at the edges. You should go now, before I change my mind about letting you walk out of this room alive. Without another word, Ned bowed and left, his heart pounding. For the first time, he had laid out the truth before Cersei Lannister. She had not denied it. She had not struck him down. If there was a chance, however slim, that she would choose to flee with her children and avert the bloodshed, Ned had to cling to it. He knew he had placed himself in grave danger by revealing his hand. But he also knew he could not stand idle while the realm moved toward catastrophe. That night, Ned did not sleep well. Each creak of the corridor, each gust of wind against the shutters, made him half expect the gold cloaks to appear and drag him to the dungeons. Yet when dawn came, he was still alive, and the Red Keep remained eerily peaceful. If Cersei was planning a counterstrike, she was biding her time. In the days that followed, Ned continued his duties, never letting on that anything had changed. He issued orders about city affairs, settled disputes, and quietly asked Baelish and Varys to keep him informed of the slightest shift in the Lannisters' movements. Both men seemed intrigued by his new watchfulness but refrained from prying too directly. They were spymasters in their own right, dancing on the edges of every secret. An uneasy hush fell over the court. Cersei did not cross paths with Ned in public, but he sensed she was up to something. Jaime, too, grew strangely subdued. Tyrion had vanished, reportedly on a journey of his own. Ned wondered if that was mere coincidence or if the imp had chosen to be absent for whatever would come next. Finally, one evening, a messenger arrived at Ned's chamber with a summons from the Queen. She wished to speak with him immediately in the royal solar. The cryptic tone of the note set his nerves on edge. He prepared himself, donned his cloak, strapped on the dagger he kept hidden at his belt. He told Jory to stand ready outside the corridor in case something went awry. Stepping inside the solar, Ned found the Queen alone, perched on the edge of a chair by the hearth, dressed in a somber gown of dark green. A single candle lit the room, casting dancing shadows across the floor. Cersei gestured for him to close the door, which he did carefully. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Lord Stark, I have thought about our last conversation. I have spoken to Jaime, and I have sent word to my father. We have weighed the matter carefully, and we see that you hold all the cards, or so you believe. But there may be a path to avoid war if you are willing to concede certain points." Ned felt a surge of hope tempered by caution. "I am listening." The Queen's voice was steady, though the candlelight revealed a faint tremor in her hands. "My children will not flee King's Landing, nor will I. That is not an option Jaime or my father would ever allow. We have too much at stake. However, we might propose a compromise. If Robert remains ignorant, if you allow Joffrey's status to remain unquestioned, we can keep the peace. We will, in exchange, give you certain guarantees. Your daughter Sansa's marriage to Joffrey will be honored. Your family will maintain its position and holdings, and we will move to reduce the crown's debts to the Lannisters. Perhaps even restore a measure of solvency." The word struck Ned like a blow. "You ask me to remain silent? To let a false heir sit upon the throne? To vow my daughter to him? That would be a betrayal of Robert and the entire realm." Her mouth formed a thin line. "It would be survival, Lord Stark. Do you not see how precarious Robert's rule is? He's drowning in debt. He's lost interest in governance. And the realm sees Joffrey as his son. Uprooting that myth would do more harm than good." Ned's anger smoldered beneath the surface, but he kept it in check. "You would ask me to betray the truth itself, Your Grace. I came here to serve Robert, not to mislead him." She lifted her chin. "Truth is a fickle weapon, Lord Stark. You claim to care about the realm's well-being. This realm might be stronger if Joffrey were to succeed. Do you honestly believe Robert's brothers would do any better? Renly is charming but frivolous. Stannis is honest but harsh. They would tear the realm apart in competition, and the Lannisters would not sit idle. I promise you that. We have the gold, we have the armies. Support Joffrey, keep the lie intact, and the realm might know peace, though it's built on a fragile foundation." Ned closed his eyes, remembering the weight of his vow to Robert, the memory of Jon Arryn, the love he bore for his own family. He felt as though he stood at a crossroads where every path led to betrayal of something he held dear. "And if I refuse?" Cersei's gaze darkened. "Then you bring war upon us all. Your head will be the first to roll, but it won't stop there. My father will not rest until the North bends the knee or is broken. Robert's fury will burn half the kingdom before he's done. Is that truly what you desire?" His voice was thick with conflict. "No, I desire a realm in which honor still has meaning, a realm in which we do not seat bastards on the throne and call them kings. Her face hardened. Then we are at an impasse. I have said my piece. The next time we speak of this, the choices may be far fewer. For a long, pulsing moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ned bowed stiffly and turned to go. His mind churned with doubt, fear, and anger. Behind him, he heard her whisper, as if to herself, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground." He stepped out into the corridor, his heart pounding. He had done everything in his power to be diplomatic, to avoid an open rift. But the truth demanded to be acknowledged. If Cersei and Jaime refused to yield, if Tywin threatened war, then the delicate balance might soon shatter. Perhaps all Ned had accomplished was to delay the inevitable. Yet in that delay, there might still be hope for a peaceful outcome, or at least a smaller conflagration. He could only pray to the old gods that his attempt at diplomacy would buy him the time he needed, and that when the lines were drawn, he would be able to save his family, the realm, and perhaps even the Queen's innocent children from the bloodshed to come. He stepped out into the corridor, his heart pounding, uncertain whether his careful diplomacy had saved them all or merely delayed an inevitable conflagration. The torchlit hall was empty except for 2 guards standing at its far end, stiff and silent. Ned forced a calm expression, each step resonating on the cold stone floor. Jory Castle waited beyond, his gaze sharpening the instant his lord appeared. Ned offered him only a terse nod, and together they walked away from the Queen's solar, their footsteps echoing in that hush. As soon as they reached Ned's private chambers, Jory closed the door behind them. The dim candlelight revealed the tension in the captain's eyes. "My lord," he said, voice low, "what do we do now? The Queen's summons. Was it some threat? Should I gather the men?" Ned sank wearily into a chair. His mind was still reeling. Gathering arms might provoke more danger than it prevents. He ran a hand over his face, breath unsteady. "She knows that I know. Our confrontation was civil enough. For now. I told her there might be a path to avoid bloodshed. She all but refused it, but then offered a twisted compromise of her own. She wants me to remain silent about the children's parentage." Jory stiffened, but he inclined his head. "And if we do that, we serve a lie. But if we don't?" Ned nodded, reading his captain's thoughts. "War, Robert's wrath, Tywin Lannister's gold and armies, the entire kingdom tearing itself apart. 1,000 times have I wished I never discovered the truth." He let his eyes drift to a half-open window. The night sky was cloudy, the moon hidden. "If I speak, I condemn thousands to death. If I don't, I betray the man I swore to serve, the realm I swore to protect. Diplomacy can only do so much." He rose and began pacing, boots scraping across the polished stones. "I must consider carefully. If there is any middle ground at all, I'll seek it." Jory set his jaw. "My lord, if it's advice you want, you have my loyalty. But you'll not find an easy answer to this. The Lannisters are watching us closely." Ned gave the captain a long, grateful look. I know." They spoke no further on the matter. Ned dismissed Jory with instructions to keep vigilant and to spread no word of the Queen's secret. As the door closed behind Jory, Ned sank onto the edge of his bed, mind racing. He thought of Catelyn and their children, Robb at Winterfell, Bran recovering from his fall, Rickon too young to understand. Sansa was already entangled in this betrothal to Joffrey. Arya despised the southern court, longing for the fierce winters of home. His family hung in the balance just as surely as the realm did. Sleep eluded him. The bells in some distant tower struck midnight, and still he lay awake, replaying every word Cersei had uttered. He remembered the flicker of desperation on her face, the subtle trembling of her hand upon the cup. She was cornered, but so was he, and cornered beasts could lash out. When he finally drifted into a restless slumber, the dreams that came were filled with half-formed images of roaring lions and howling wolves, and the cold shadows of a war-torn land. He rose at dawn with a headache throbbing behind his eyes. An urgent summons from the king arrived before he even dressed. The messenger was breathless. "His Grace requests you on a hunt, my lord," the man said. "He's in a hurry." A hunt, Ned cursed under his breath. Robert's hunts were seldom short, never simple, and often fueled by wine. The last thing he wanted was to ride off into the countryside when the city was such a tinderbox. But refusing the king's invitation might draw unwanted suspicion. If the queen suspected that Ned would run to Robert immediately, she might act first. Better to play along. He must show that nothing had changed in his outward behavior. He dressed in riding leathers, fastening a sword belt around his waist. When he emerged into the courtyard, Robert and a boisterous group of lords were already gathering, jesting loudly, half of them with wine goblets in hand. Robert turned, face splitting into a broad grin. "Ned, you took long enough. Are you trying to avoid me?" Ned forced a faint smile. "Never, Your Grace. I simply had to find a tunic thick enough to keep out the chill of the morning." A few of the lords laughed at the mild jest. Robert slapped Ned on the shoulder. "Good man. The dogs are ready. We'll ride out beyond the Blackwater. See if we can flush out a boar or two. Gods, I've missed real sport." The king was in high spirits. Ned glanced around, noting who was in attendance. Renly Baratheon was there, mounted on a swift courser. Lord Tyrell had sent a cousin, a tall, lanky youth. Lord Royce from the Vale was present, as well as a handful of other courtiers eager for a place by the king's side. Conspicuously absent were Jaime and the Queen. Ned considered that a small relief. If the Queen was not with Robert, perhaps she was quietly meeting with her allies, drafting some plan in the Red Keep's shadows. "Move out," Robert called. The party clattered through the gates, hounds barking and horses snorting. They rode into the city streets, lined by onlookers, and eventually out through the gates into the countryside. The summer sun rose higher, burning off the morning fog. Dust kicked up under the hooves. Soon, King's Landing was out of sight behind them, though Ned felt its intrigues tugging at his mind. Robert seemed intent on savoring this brief escape from the burdens of kingship. His laughter rang loud at every body tale, and he guzzled strong wine from a skin as they rode. At midday, they made camp near a shallow stream, letting the horses drink while the hounds snapped at each other over scraps. Robert dismounted heavily, tossing his reins to a squire. "Ha! We'll eat, then we'll track that boar. I saw fresh tracks not far from here." Ned slid off his own horse. He sipped a little water from the stream, washing the dust from his throat, ignoring the wine. Robert was already on his second skin of it, cheeks florid. When the king dropped onto a patch of grass, Ned moved to sit beside him. Robert grinned. "You look troubled, Ned. Court life stifling you already?" He jerked his head in a conspiratorial manner. "I told you it'd be miserable, all those council meetings, those blasted ledgers. But you insisted you'd do your duty." Ned mustered a wry smile. "Duty can be a heavy burden, Your Grace, but I manage." The king stretched, letting out a content sigh. "We old warriors belong in the field, not in those suffocating chambers. To ride free, there's nothing like it." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But you do look drawn. If there's something on your mind, out with it." Ned weighed the merits of speaking. Cersei had demanded his silence, and an outright confession to Robert now might spark the war he sought to avoid. But neither could he lie to Robert's face. "I've had a trying time, my king. The city is full of hidden knots. And yes, the crown's finances are dire. We owe a great deal to your in-laws, among others. The Lannisters hold us by the purse strings." Robert's face soured. "I know, curse them, but we need their gold." He spat the words out. "They've grown too powerful, if you ask me. That's why I've been telling you, be careful around them. I'm not blind to their machinations. Tywin is cunning beyond measure, and Cersei, well, she can be cunning as well." Ned ventured a half-truth. "I believe we can still maintain good relations with them if we navigate carefully, Your Grace. But I must admit, I worry about the day they decide the throne is not worth supporting if it doesn't benefit them directly." Robert shrugged, draining another gulp of wine. The day they decide that, we'll cross that bridge. Until then, we keep them close. That's what a wise king does, Ned. A wise king uses the Lannisters for as long as he can. He barked a laugh. Gods, never thought I'd hear myself say that. But I'm not the same man I was in the rebellion. Ned felt a stab of pity for his friend. Robert was not the same man. The burdens of rule had sapped his vitality. His restless spirit found release only in hunts and feasts. I understand, he said gently. I only hope the realm will survive these entanglements. Robert gave him a puzzled look, as though wanting to ask more. But a shout from one of the huntsmen interrupted them. New tracks had been found. The hounds bayed, and Robert lumbered to his feet, almost tripping over a rock in his eagerness. Up, Ned. Let's see what the day brings us. They mounted again and rode into the forest. The pines thickened, the undergrowth crackling under the horses' hooves. The huntsman released the hounds to follow the boar's scent. Robert led the way, weaving through the trunks, the thrill of the chase igniting a fire in his eyes. His laughter boomed each time the hounds caught the scent anew. Ned kept pace, though tension knotted in his gut. The boar's tracks were large, the beast likely formidable. More than once, he glanced at the wineskin Robert kept strapped to his saddle, noticing how often the king raised it to his lips. With each gulp, Robert's reflexes dulled. His seat grew looser. Ned wanted to caution him, but to do so would shatter the king's merriment. He told himself that the other lords and huntsmen would keep Robert out of serious trouble. Yet an unspoken dread gnawed at him. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the sunlight dimmed beneath the canopy of needled branches. The hounds began barking wildly. Robert gave a triumphant shout and spurred his horse forward. Ned and a few others followed at a brisk canter, ducking low-hanging branches. Suddenly, the boar crashed into view. A massive, bristling creature with wicked tusks. It charged the hounds, sending them scattering with yelps. Robert roared, drunk on wine and excitement, dismounting so hastily that he stumbled. Hold him, he bellowed at the huntsmen. Two of them readied spears while another tried to distract the boar. The beast spun, squealing in anger, splintering one man's spear with a slash of its tusks. In a daze, Ned leapt off his horse. He saw Robert draw a long, heavy spear from the squire at his side. The king advanced, unsteady but fearless, shouting curses at the boar. Ned tried to close the distance, but tangled undergrowth slowed him. He saw a huntsman toppled into the dirt, the boar about to gore him. Robert lunged, sinking his spear into the creature's flank. The boar squealed and wheeled on Robert. "Robert!" Ned called, but the king was too exhilarated or too drunk to hear. He yanked his spear free, sending a spray of blood across the forest floor. The boar charged with startling speed. Robert thrust his spear again, too high, missing the boar's skull. One of the beast's tusks raked across Robert's torso, tearing cloth and flesh. Robert grunted in pain, lost his footing. He managed a final desperate stab, burying the spear in the boar's neck, and the beast collapsed in a thrashing heap. At last, Ned reached the king's side. Robert lay on his back, grimacing, hand pressed to his ribs. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Damn it!" he gasped, struggling for breath. "Wine made me slow." Panic hammered in Ned's veins, but he forced himself to remain calm. He yelled for the camp. Two huntsmen scrambled forward, face white, while Renly rushed in from behind, shouting for help. "Grand Maester Pycelle, we need him," Ned said, voice trembling. "We'll carry the king back to the horses and ride as fast as we can." Robert's breathing sounded labored, each exhale wet. He gave Ned a weak grin. "Told you we belong in the field," he said faintly. Then his eyes fluttered, and he slipped into unconsciousness. They fashioned a makeshift litter from spears and cloaks. The boar lay dead, a beast of monstrous size, but no one paid it further heed. All that mattered was Robert. Renly and Ned led the horses, guiding them gently so as not to jostle the king. Blood soaked through Robert's tunic and dripped to the forest floor. With mounting dread, Ned saw the color drain from the king's face. They rode hard on the return journey, the wind whistling in their ears. One huntsman sped ahead to alert the Red Keep. Servants and guards swarmed the courtyard when Ned and the party arrived at nightfall. Cersei appeared with a hand pressed to her mouth, golden hair tumbling over her shoulders. When she saw Robert's unmoving form, she let out a choked cry, but quickly schooled her features into calm authority. "Bring him to his chambers," she ordered. "Fetch Pycelle at once." Ned and Renly hoisted Robert's litter. Jory, along with several strong guards, cleared a path through the corridors. By the time they reached the king's bedchamber, Robert's breath rattled in his chest. Pycelle hurried in behind them, a maester's kit clutched in his hands. He began cleaning and probing the wound, shaking his head gravely. The queen stood at the foot of the bed, eyes glittering. Jaime arrived not long after, clad in white armor, silent and grim. Ned hovered near the bed, hands stained with Robert's blood, heart heavy as lead. Pycelle looked up, trembling with age. The tusk punctured his side and tore at the innards. I will do what I can, but such wounds are often mortal." "No," Renly whispered. "He's survived battles 10 times worse. He must live." Cersei's face had turned paler than the linens. She swallowed, then gestured for Pycelle to continue. "Do everything," she said. "Anything that might help." Ned stepped forward. "Pycelle, if there's milk of the poppy or any cure." "I have it, my lord, I have it," Pycelle muttered. "But this is not a mere cut. He's lost too much blood. We must close the wound. Hope the fever does not devour him. Please stand aside. Let me and my assistants work." Ned caught a glimpse of the queen's expression. Her eyes flickered to him with something like suspicion or accusation. He realized that Robert's injury might precipitate the very crisis he had sought to prevent. If Robert died before Ned could secure a stable plan, the succession would surely fall to Joffrey, and the secret of his parentage would tear the realm asunder. Tywin Lannister and Jaime would not hesitate to press Joffrey forward as rightful heir. Stannis might stake his own claim if he learned the truth. War might be inevitable. "Lord Stark," Jaime murmured, stepping close, "we should let Pycelle tend to him. The queen needs peace." Ned looked at Robert's pale face, at the flecks of blood on his beard. He nodded grimly. Outside the bedchamber, the halls teemed with anxious courtiers. Word of the king's injury had spread in an instant. Varys stood in a corner, shifting from foot to foot, eyes lowered in a mask of sympathy. Littlefinger hovered near the columns, mouth set in a thoughtful line. Even Tyrion Lannister had emerged, arms folded, to observe the commotion. The entire Red Keep seemed to hold its breath. Ned pulled Renly aside, voice hushed. "We must think quickly if the worst happens. Tell me, do you have any notion how the line of succession might be challenged?" Renly's green eyes flashed, partly in sorrow, partly in frustration. "Yes, if Robert dies, the throne goes to Joffrey, officially. But we both know Joffrey is not fit to rule. And if there's more behind that," he added carefully, not spelling out the incest rumor, "we could face chaos. My older brother Stannis is the next legitimate heir, if Joffrey is not Robert's son. But I doubt the Lannisters will concede without a fight." Ned felt his heart clench. "We must be certain who can hold the realm together best. If Joffrey is truly not Robert's son," he glanced around, checking no one overheard, "Stannis may have the right, but is he the man to unify the lords? Or will they rebel against him?" Renly looked away. "Stannis is honorable, but he's as rigid as iron. The lords might bend, or they might splinter. If that happens, the Tyrells and the Lannisters could seize power in the confusion." He paused, voice dropping low. "But there's another possibility. Some have whispered that I, as the king's youngest brother, might be more palatable to the southern lords." Ned studied Renly's youthful features, the vibrant cloak that adorned his shoulders. Renly was charismatic, popular among the court, but not the rightful heir if law and tradition were observed. I see. And what do you think is best for the realm? Renly's face twitched with uncertainty. I only want what keeps the realm from being torn in half. You must know that if Joffrey is crowned, and Stannis declares him illegitimate, war will break out. But if Stannis is crowned, some lords might resist him. War again. Unless we can unify behind one man strongly enough to outmaneuver the Lannisters. If that man is me, the Tyrells might align with me, given Marjorie's closeness to me. He said this delicately, as if testing Ned's reaction. Ned felt a swirl of conflicted thoughts. It sounded too much like ambition. Yet he could not deny that Renly's mild temperament and easy charm might, in fact, soothe the realm. Still, ignoring the legitimate claim of the older brother tasted like dishonor. We'll speak of this later, he said, uncertain. For now, we must pray for the king's recovery. Renly nodded. Of course. They parted as more onlookers arrived, seeking news. Inside the chamber, Pycelle's assistants bustled with bandages and salves. Muffled groans drifted through the door. Ned's stomach twisted. He felt powerless. The crisis was here, and his attempts at diplomacy with Cersei might unravel if Robert died. Everything depended on whether the king pulled through. Hours dragged on. Ned waited in a corridor alcove, forearms braced on his knees, shoulders slumped. Varys approached quietly, clasping his hands in front of his spider-like frame. A terrible tragedy, the eunuch murmured. These boars can be quite vicious. One wonders if a sober huntsman might have avoided the worst of it. Ned eyed him. You suggest the king was plied with drink intentionally? Varys pursed his lips as if shocked by the notion. Oh, I would never suggest anything so vile without proof, my lord. Merely an observation. A chill ran through Ned. It was not unheard of. After all, wine could dull the reflexes of the mightiest warrior. Could someone have ensured that Robert was well supplied with potent spirits? Could the queen herself have arranged it? He recalled how the huntsman never seemed to run out of wineskins that day. It was Robert's own choice to drink, Ned said softly, yet doubt troubled him. Varys gave a languid nod. Of course, and with the king's life in balance, the question of succession grows ever more pressing. I do hope you are ready for what might come. Ned's voice was thick with frustration. There is no easy readiness for war, Lord Varys. No, said the spider, but perhaps there is readiness for a cunning truce. Only cunning can halt cunning, my lord. He bowed with a hint of irony and glided away. Ned found no comfort in his words. By dawn, Robert's condition had worsened. Fever racked his body, and his wound continued to weep blood. Cersei, glassy-eyed with fatigue, refused to leave his bedside. Jaime lingered near her, arms folded, gaze flickering with an anger that had nowhere to go. Ned stepped into the chamber, ignoring Jaime's stare, to stand on the opposite side of the bed. Pycelle hovered, muttering about potions and compresses, none of which appeared to help. Robert stirred, opening bleary eyes. His voice was weak, but still carried a faint echo of the old Robert. Where's the boar? He mumbled. Ned bent low. Dead, your grace. You slew the beast. What? Robert gave a hollow laugh that turned into a cough. Magnificent. Ha! He winced, struggling for breath. Ned, come closer. Ned leaned in. Jaime and Cersei watched intently, but Robert didn't seem to care. With great effort, the king gripped Ned's wrist. I'm dying, he rasped. Don't lie to me. I know I am. I can feel it. Ned swallowed. You must not speak like that. Save your strength. Robert's eyes flitted to the ceiling. Save it for what? Dying slower? He turned his head, gaze locking on Ned. I'll make this quick. I want you to have the watch over Joff. I want him to succeed me if the gods take me. You'll protect him, guide him as you once guided me. Promise me. Ned's heart thundered. He felt the queen's stare, burning hot. Jaime, too, seemed to stiffen. It was the moment he had dreaded. If he promised Robert to protect Joffrey's claim, He would be complicit in the lie of the boy's parentage. But if he refused, or revealed the truth now, it would tear this room apart, likely dooming Robert in his final hours to heartbreak and rage. The realm would unravel with that final spark of fury. He placed his free hand gently over Robert's. "I promise to protect the realm, Your Grace," he said, voice shaking. "I promise to see your wishes carried out in the best way possible." The words were deliberately vague, but Robert lacked the strength to parse them. Robert gave a slight nod, eyes rolling back. "Good," he murmured. Then he seized in a bout of coughing that left bloody froth on his lips. Pycelle and Cersei rushed in. Ned stepped back, trembling. He had effectively promised nothing. He had promised to do what was best for the realm, not specifically to put Joffrey on the throne. Perhaps that was the compromise he must cling to in these final hours. Jaime glared at him from across the bed, unsmiling. Cersei's face was an unreadable mask. Ned bowed his head and retreated, uncertain whether the Queen would interpret his words as acceptance of Robert's final wish or not. Even if she did, he was not bound by oath to crown Joffrey. He simply had to do what was best for the realm, which, in Ned's mind, meant ensuring the throne did not fall into the hands of a bastard conceived by incest. It meant ensuring a stable succession that wouldn't plunge the kingdoms into war. He spent the next hours in a haze. Servants lit candles throughout the Red Keep, while guards in black and gold patrolled every hallway. Murmurs of the king's imminent demise spread in hushed tones. The courtyards emptied. The city seemed to hold its breath. Ned knew that somewhere in the labyrinth of corridors, the Lannisters would be plotting their next move. Renly might be plotting his. Stannis, on Dragonstone, would hear the news soon and prepare his own. Through the flicker of candlelight and the hush of sorrow, the war drums were already pounding. Near midday, Peter Baelish intercepted Ned in a corridor. Littlefinger wore a sympathetic smile that never reached his sly eyes. "Lord Stark, I hear the king's wound is mortal. You have my deepest condolences. I know how fond you were of him." Ned pressed his lips into a grim line. "What is it you want, Peter? I have no time for dancing around words." Baelish inclined his head. "Then I'll be direct. Without Robert, the realm stands on a knife's edge. The question is who will hold power. Joffrey? Stannis? Or even Renly, who has quietly approached certain lords about the possibility of skipping over Stannis altogether. I imagine you're not keen on breaking the succession's legal chain, but neither are you keen on crowning a child you suspect to be illegitimate." Ned fixed him with a steely gaze. "You know too much, Littlefinger." A fleeting smirk curved Baelish's lips. "I make it my business to know. More importantly, I offer my services. You wish to avoid war, yes? Perhaps I can help. I have an uncanny knack for forging alliances." Ned's voice hardened. "Your alliances often come with strings, and I recall you telling me to keep my foes close. Are you my foe, Peter?" Baelish laid a hand over his heart in mock offense. "I am but a humble advisor, my lord. Consider this. If the truth of the children's parentage comes out after Robert dies, the Lannisters will fight tooth and nail for Joffrey. Stannis will make his claim as the rightful heir. The Tyrells might support Renly. The Riverlands will be split, especially if your wife's sister Lisa muddles the veil. We'll have 4 or 5 claimants, each tearing the realm apart. Unless there is a more nuanced solution." Ned frowned, recalling the Queen's suggestion that he remain silent and simply let Joffrey ascend. That was not a solution he could stomach. "What sort of solution do you propose?" Baelish's smile was cat-like. "One that keeps the secret just a bit longer. Imagine you let Joffrey take the throne, but you, his hand, have the true reins of power. Then, over time, you could shape the boy, keep him in check, ensure he does not become a monster. You could manage the realm's finances, glean more leverage against House Lannister if need be. If Joffrey grows too monstrous, or if war threatens anyway, you then reveal the truth at a more opportune time, when you have the alliances to withstand the Lannister backlash. That, my dear lord, might spare us a great deal of blood." Ned's stomach churned. The plan reeked of deceit and manipulation, everything he despised about politics. You ask me to place a false king on the throne knowingly? To break every vow I hold dear? To lie to the realm? To betray Robert's memory? Betrayal is such a loaded word, Baelish said, almost gently. Think of it as a necessary lie, a noble lie to keep peace. You yourself have already been dancing around it, haven't you? You gave Robert no direct promise that you'd crown Joffrey, only that you'd protect the realm. And protecting the realm might mean exactly this, propping up the false king until you can ensure a better outcome. Ned clenched his fists, warring with his conscience. He remembered how he once told Robert that a lie was a lie, no matter how well-intentioned. But the stakes were too high to cling blindly to pure ideals. Might this plan truly forestall a civil war? Could Ned stomach the notion of leaving Joffrey in place? Even for a time? The boy was cruel, and eventually the truth would surface. Was that truly better than the immediate crisis? I'll not decide this at a whim, Ned growled. Robert yet lives, if barely. Let me see to him, and we'll speak again if I must. Baelish bowed. By all means. I only suggest that if the king passes soon, you'll have precious little time to act. The Lannisters will move quickly, with or without you. Farewell, Lord Stark. He slipped away into the labyrinth of corridors, leaving Ned with too many conflicting thoughts. Evening settled, and the flickering torches brought more bad news. Robert's condition deteriorated to the brink. Pycelle emerged from the king's chamber, face sagging with exhaustion, to announce that the king of the Seven Kingdoms was not expected to last the night. The hush that fell over the Red Keep was like the stillness before a storm. Men exchanged fearful glances, wives clutched at each other's hands, and the whispering started in earnest. Who would be crowned next? Cersei did not leave Robert's side. Jaime posted a squad of gold cloaks and Lannister house guards at strategic points, making no attempt to hide it. Renly quietly conferred with various lords in the courtyard. Ned saw him speaking in hushed tones with Loras Tyrell. The Knights of the Vale, newly arrived to pay homage, were camped near the city's edge. Rumors said the Queen had sent a raven to Tywin Lannister, commanding him to bring forces from the west. Another rumor placed Tywin already in the field, marching with thousands of men. Ned felt the noose tightening around the city. At last, Ned summoned the courage to enter Robert's chamber once more, with the Queen's permission. He found the king lying still as stone, sweat matting his hair to his forehead, breath shallow. Cersei sat near him, hands clasped in her lap. Pycelle dozed in a chair, having exhausted his meager healing arts. Jaime stood by the window, arms folded, a pensive scowl on his face. Ned approached the bed. Robert's eyes flickered open for a moment, and a shadow of recognition crossed them. The king lifted a trembling hand, beckoning Ned closer. The Queen stood. "Let me speak to him," Robert rasped. Cersei nodded, stepping back. Jaime watched warily, but did not interfere. Ned knelt by the bed, leaning his ear close to Robert's lips. The king let out a weak sigh. "That damned boar," he muttered. "I was a fool." "No, your grace," Ned whispered. Robert coughed. "Stop lying. You were always too honest for court. Gods, you must keep the realm together. You must ensure Joffrey is cared for. Tell him I never meant. He's my son. Promise me, Ned." Ned felt tears burn at the edges of his eyes. He thought of the abomination of secrets swirling in the Queen's circle. But now, to tell Robert that Joffrey was not his would be an act of cruelty. He swallowed thickly, voice barely audible. "I'll protect him," he said. It was all he could manage. Robert let out a pained breath. Whether of relief or sorrow, Ned could not tell. His eyes rolled closed. Pycelle stirred, hastening forward to check the king's pulse. Moments later, a hush fell that seemed to swallow the chamber whole. It was done. Robert Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, was no more. Cersei inhaled sharply, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes though her face remained composed. She rose slowly, pressing a hand to Robert's still warm forehead as if in a final farewell. Jaime turned from the window, lips pressed thin. Pycelle bowed his head, hands trembling. Then the queen drew a long breath, squaring her shoulders. "All kneel," she commanded, her voice echoing off the chamber walls, regal and imperious even in grief. "Your king is dead. Now we must see to the throne." Ned stood, refusing to kneel to her, but he bowed his head out of respect for Robert's memory. Jaime took a step forward, as if to object to Ned's lack of obedience, but Cersei lifted a hand. "Not now," she murmured. Her green eyes sought Ned's, glimmering with a silent, urgent question. Would he stand aside and let her son be crowned, or would he challenge them here and now? Ned remained silent, chest tight with grief and uncertainty. One step too far in either direction could unleash a wave of blood. She turned to Pycelle. "Send word to the city. King Robert has passed. Summon the High Septon so that he may bless the new king, my beloved son Joffrey Baratheon, second of his name." Her voice quavered slightly on the word beloved, but she pressed on. "Lord Stark, as hand of the king, you will oversee the arrangement for the coronation." A coil of dread twisted in Ned's stomach. He was the hand, and it was expected of him to guide the realm until Joffrey was officially crowned. But the moment he agreed, it would appear as though he sanctioned Joffrey's claim. He swallowed. "Yes, your grace," he said quietly, again using a diplomatic phrasing. He did not say King Joffrey, only that he would arrange the coronation. Cersei took that as acceptance. She beckoned Jaime closer and gave him instructions to secure the keep, to ensure that no rumor or rebellious whisper spread unchecked. Jaime nodded curtly, throwing Ned a wary glance. He and the queen likely suspected that Ned's compliance was half-hearted. Yet for this moment, compliance was all that was needed. The city was about to be consumed by funeral rites, by the mourning of Robert, and by the coming coronation preparations. Ned, numb, left the chamber. Renly found him in the corridor, eyes wild. "It's true, then? Robert is dead." Ned gave a single grim nod, and Renly released a trembling breath. "I've tried to speak with the queen, but she's closed ranks with Jaime. They're guarding Joffrey as if expecting an attempt on his life. I have some men loyal to me. If we strike quickly—" Ned cut him off, voice hard. "Strike and do what? Slay a boy? Imprison the queen? And then the Lannister armies will descend upon us. The city would break into chaos. The realm is not ready for such violence." Renly's face darkened. "So we do nothing? We let them crown Joffrey, who might not even be Robert's true son?" "Ned, you know as well as I do that it's a farce. The moment the Lannisters secure the throne, all who oppose them will be in danger. They'll try to arrest Stannis or have him declared traitor. They'll push your family out if you become too troublesome." Ned's voice dropped to a tense whisper. "And you wish to place yourself on the throne instead? Or shall we call Stannis from Dragonstone? Any overt move will lead to a savage conflict. We need more time, more allies, and above all else, a plan that might avoid the entire realm erupting into a bloodbath." Renly's frustration was palpable. "Time is not our ally. Once Joffrey sits the throne, the Lannisters control the city watch, the gold cloaks, the coin. They'll root out every threat. By the time we muster any real force, it might be too late." Ned pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, a splitting headache forming. "Let me think," he murmured, exhausted. "In the meantime, do nothing rash. The funeral must happen, the coronation must be prepared. In that window, we might find a way to keep the realm from falling apart." Renly wanted to protest, but he saw the strain in Ned's face, the honesty in his weariness, and relented with a nod. "Don't wait too long," he warned, then turned to stride away, his green cloak swirling. Ned stood there in the corridor for a long, still moment, grappling with the gravity of Robert's death. Had all his efforts at diplomacy come to this point? He felt no satisfaction, only a growing dread that the compromise he sought might slip through his fingers. On the morrow, the city bells tolled a low, mournful dirge for King Robert. Riders galloped forth with black banners, announcing his death throughout the 7 kingdoms. The Red Keep prepared for the public display of the body, with vigil after vigil. Ned had no taste for it, but as hand, he had to attend, stand solemnly beside the Queen and Joffrey in the Great Hall as the king's body was laid in state. Even in death, Robert loomed massive, his hammered breastplate shining, his sword at his side. Incense burned, shrouding the hall in sweet-smelling smoke. Courtiers filed past, kneeling or bowing, some with genuine sorrow, others with perfunctory gestures. Sansa wept quietly, clinging to Septa Mordain. Arya stood grim-faced, more disturbed by the drama of the court than by the king's passing. Ned stood behind them, gaze flicking between the Queen's face and Joffrey's. The boy's expression was a mixture of anxiety and pride. He was to be king, but his father's death rattled him in ways he did not seem able to process. Cersei kept an arm around him protectively, occasionally whispering reassurances. Jaime hovered nearby, clad in Kingsguard white, eyes scanning the hall for threats. In the days that followed, tension simmered throughout King's Landing. Tywin Lannister had not yet arrived, but rumors abounded that he was marching with a great host toward Harrenhal, or perhaps toward the city itself. The Tyrells were rumored to be gathering forces at Highgarden. Lords from the north were said to be in flux, uncertain whether to rally behind the soon-to-be crowned Joffrey or wait for Ned's guidance. The Eyrie was closed off under Lysa Arryn's anxious paranoia. Stannis remained silent on Dragonstone. Through it all, Ned struggled to maintain the veneer of a functioning hand, giving orders about funeral preparations, approving expenses, ensuring the City Watch remained on high alert for any sign of unrest. He kept seeing Peter Baelish's smirk in the corners of his mind, hearing Varys's cryptic warnings, recalling Cersei's ultimatum and Renly's pleas. The swirl of conflicting agendas weighed on him like a mountain. How many more days could he keep this delicate balance before it cracked? One early evening, while reviewing some documents in his solar, he looked up to see Sansa standing at the threshold, eyes reddened. She wore a pale blue gown, her auburn hair braided in the southern style. "Father," she said softly. Ned set aside the parchments. "Come in, Sansa. Are you well?" She stepped forward, wringing her hands. I wanted to ask what happens now that King Robert is gone. Joffrey, they say he'll be crowned soon, and that means I'll be queen one day. But," her voice quavered, tears threatening, "I don't know if I want any of it." Ned's heart tightened. He motioned for her to sit, gently taking her hand. "Listen to me, my sweet girl. This is a complicated time. You must be strong. Whatever happens, you'll have a place in this realm, with or without Joffrey. You are a Stark of Winterfell." She nodded, sniffling. "But I love him," she said in a small voice. "Or I thought I did. I wanted to be his queen, but he's changed since his father's death. He's so tense, and sometimes he snaps at me or at his mother. He has these moods. I'm afraid." Ned's jaw clenched. He recalled Joffrey's inherent cruelty, which now might only grow worse under the pressures of kingship and the indulgence of his mother. "If you ever feel unsafe, you must tell me, or tell your Septa. I won't let any harm come to you." She nodded, her eyes wandering to the window. "When will the coronation be? Mother used to say the north is too far, but she'd come if she could, wouldn't she?" Ned felt a rush of longing for Catelyn. He had sent word to her at Winterfell urging caution, but he hadn't dared to expose the entire truth of the succession. "Your mother cannot travel at the moment," he said gently. "But I promise, once the realm is stable, we'll see each other again." Sansa rose, posture trembling with uncertainty. I hope everything works out, Father. I don't want war. I want to be a good queen." He watched her go with a heavy heart, longing to shield her from the storms to come, storms he could feel gathering like thunderclouds on the horizon. Shortly after, a knock sounded at the door. Jory Castle entered, bowing stiffly. "My lord, the Queen requests your presence in her private audience chamber." Ned's pulse quickened. Did she say what it was about? Jory shook his head. "Only that it's urgent and concerns state affairs." Ned thanked him and made his way through the Red Keep's winding corridors until he reached Cersei's private audience chamber. 2 Lannister guards stood at the door. They nodded briskly and let him pass. Inside, Cersei sat at a small table. The plush room smelled of lavender. A window overlooked the city, the setting sun bathing everything in golden light. Spread across the table were several scrolls and a half-filled goblet of wine. She lifted her gaze from the parchment, gesturing for Ned to sit. He noticed they were alone. Not even Jaime stood guard. That in itself was surprising. "Your Grace," he said in a formal tone, taking the offered seat. She steepled her fingers, studying him. "A delicate matter has arisen, one that requires your discretion, Lord Hand." Ned inclined his head. "I'm listening." She gave a short exhale, as though gathering composure. "Word has reached us that Lord Stannis has begun gathering ships at Dragonstone. He's made no formal announcement, but my sources say he's preparing to sail. Perhaps to Storm's End, perhaps elsewhere. He may be preparing to press some claim on the throne." Ned's shoulders tensed. "I see. Do you expect him to attack the city?" "It's possible. Or he might first rally certain lords in the Stormlands. Regardless, we cannot permit him to upset the coronation. The boy must be crowned quickly to secure his legitimacy." She paused, letting that word, legitimacy, hang in the air. "I'd prefer that the hand of the king stand with us when the time comes, in a public show of unity. If you stand beside Joffrey during the crowning, it will send a powerful message to the realm that House Stark is loyal, and it will dissuade other rebellious thoughts." Ned felt the snare closing around him. Standing beside Joffrey would be tantamount to endorsing him as rightful heir. Yet refusing would mark Ned openly as a traitor. Was that what Cersei hoped, to force his hand? He answered with cautious neutrality. "I'll do my duty as hand, to uphold the king's peace." Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes remained guarded. "Excellent. In return, I can promise that your family will remain safe, your position secure, and we will look favorably upon your northern interests. The Lannisters do not forget allies." He felt a wave of revulsion at her attempt to buy him so blatantly, but he forced himself to remain still. "Your Grace, if Stannis truly raises a banner of rebellion, the realm must be prepared to defend itself. But," he took a careful breath, "might we not attempt negotiation? If we push him to the brink, we risk war." Her gaze hardened. "You speak as if war can be avoided. Stannis is not a man who accepts half measures. He'll claim the Iron Throne by right of being Robert's eldest living brother. That's no trifling matter. Unless we crush him swiftly, he'll sow doubt about Joffrey's parentage. We both know how dangerous that rumor can be." Ned's mouth went dry. "Then you suggest we crush Stannis? Attack him first?" She spread her hands. "If he truly threatens our rule, we must respond with overwhelming force. That's how House Lannister secures its position. That's how Tywin taught us to keep power. Why give him the chance to gather momentum?" Ned closed his eyes briefly. Here it was, the iron-fisted logic that Tywin Lannister had wielded time and again. Slaughter your foes before they become a threat. He thought of the Targaryen children killed during the rebellion, of the screams in King's Landing when Tywin's men sacked it in Robert's name. It left a bitter taste. "And if I counsel that we attempt diplomacy with Lord Stannis first?" Cersei lifted her goblet, swirling the wine inside it. "I'd be disappointed, but I'd consider your counsel. However, if it fails, if he refuses, we act. Do I have your word that you'll not hinder such action?" His voice came out low. "You want my approval for a preemptive strike." She sipped from the goblet. "Let us call it a royal enforcement of stability in the face of treason." She fixed him with a cool gaze. "You claim to be a diplomat, Lord Stark. You claim to want peace. Sometimes, the surest path to peace is to remove those who would tear it to pieces." Ned felt the trap in her words. She was cornering him, making him complicit in her plan so that he couldn't later turn on her. If he agreed, he'd be stuck supporting a war against Stannis. If he refused outright, she might see him as an enemy that needed removing. He weighed his response carefully. "Let us try words first, your grace. If Stannis refuses to stand down, we'll consider further measures. I'll stand by the crown in its rightful defense. Is that acceptable?" She studied him, reading each nuance of his expression. Then she nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Very well. I will write to Stannis, offering terms. If he rejects them, we act. I'm pleased we could see reason." Ned attempted a tight smile, though relief was far from his heart. "As am I," he lied. Cersei reached for a roll of parchment. "Your presence at the coronation is essential, Lord Hand. I'll have the scribes prepare the ceremony for 3 days hence. We cannot wait any longer. The city must see Joffrey crowned, or they'll drift into rumor and fear." She paused, glancing at him as though testing him once more. "You will stand beside the boy, yes? Swear fealty in front of the realm." He felt as though the noose tightened. "I will stand where the realm expects the hand to stand, your grace." She smiled thinly. "Good. We shall speak more of the details soon." With that, Ned rose, bowed stiffly, and departed. His heart thundered with dread. 3 days until the coronation. 3 days to decide whether to let this travesty proceed or to reveal the truth and risk immediate war. Once Joffrey was crowned, pulling him off the throne would be harder still. Some might say impossible without a pitched battle across the 7 kingdoms. The moment Ned stepped into the corridor, he turned to Jory Castle. "Find Lord Baelish and Lord Varys," he said quietly. "Tell them I need a word privately in my solar. Also, see if you can discreetly locate Renly. I want him there as well." Jory bowed, concern flickering on his face. "At once, my lord." Ned made his way back to his rooms, ignoring the curious looks of passing servants. Once inside, he braced his hands on a table, leaning heavily. The flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Each breath felt like a struggle against unseen constraints. He had tried to be diplomatic, to walk the path of caution, yet it had led him here, on the brink of crowning a false king and supporting a potential war against the rightful heir. Something had to give. If he did nothing, he'd be complicit in a monstrous lie. If he challenged the Lannisters openly, the city would run red with blood before the next sunrise. A desperate plan began to form in his mind, one that involved forging alliances in secret, or at least securing some measure of power before the coronation. If he could gather enough force to arrest Cersei and Joffrey peacefully, present the truth to the realm, and seat Stannis on the throne without a massive slaughter. But did he have that power? He closed his eyes. Even if he attempted to seize the queen, the gold cloaks might side with the Lannisters. The City Watch commander was rumored to be amenable to bribes from Baelish or from the queen. Ned's own men were too few. Maybe Renly could bring allies from the Reach, but that might set off another chain reaction. The puzzle was maddening. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Varys and Peter Baelish entered, each wearing a guarded expression. Behind them, Renly followed, cloak dragging on the stone floor. Jory shut the door. Ned gestured for them to gather around the large table in the center of the room. "My lords," he began, voice low. "Robert is dead. The queen intends to crown Joffrey in 3 days. She wants me to stand by his side, to swear my fealty publicly. Meanwhile, Stannis gathers ships at Dragonstone. Renly," he nodded at the younger Baratheon, "you have considered your own claim, or so I hear, and we are caught in the storm." Varys spoke first, voice gentle as a breeze. "You have my condolences, my lord. King Robert was. I don't need condolences. I need a plan." Ned snapped more harshly than he intended. He drew a shaky breath. "I beg your pardon, Lord Varys. I'm at my wit's end. We must find a way to keep the realm from turning into a battlefield." Renly looked determined. "If we act now, we can keep Joffrey from being crowned. I have men within the city who would side with me. We could secure the Red Keep, place Joffrey and his mother under guard, and send word to the lords to gather behind a better claimant, myself or Stannis." Baelish raised an eyebrow. "And then you have war anyway. The Lannisters hold Casterly Rock. They'll call their banners. Tywin is already on the march. You think he'll let you put his daughter and grandson under lock and key without a fight? Renly's jaw tensed. Better to do it now, before they have time to bring their full might against us. We can hold the city, the seat of power. Varys interjected softly. Perhaps. Yet the city watch is of uncertain loyalty. And once the queen is imprisoned, you'll be branding yourself an usurper in the eyes of many, especially if Stannis steps forward and claims you're skipping over him. That alone might set half the realm against you. Are you certain you can handle it? Renly exhaled, meeting Ned's gaze. I know it's not perfect, but at least it's a plan of action, not passivity. What's your counsel, Lord Stark? Ned glanced at Baelish. You mentioned a different approach. Placing Joffrey on the throne, controlling him until a more opportune time. I find that possibility distasteful, but is there any part of it that might help us buy time? Time enough to gather a truer solution. Baelish tapped a finger on the table's surface. We allow the coronation to proceed, yes. With you by Joffrey's side, the realm sees continuity. No immediate war. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, we strengthen our positions. We negotiate with key lords, perhaps lure the city watch to your side with the right incentives. We prepare so that if Stannis does indeed attempt to land, we can either broker a deal with him or at least hold him off. In short, we keep the peace until we have the leverage to bring forth the truth, if indeed that is still your ultimate goal. Ned's lips pressed into a tight line. And if Joffrey becomes uncontrollable, or the Lannisters discover that we're planning to depose him? Baelish shrugged, as though it were a minor inconvenience. That's where cunning is required. This is King's Landing, my dear lord. Renly studied Ned uncertainly. My men could vanish into the city for a time, remain on standby. If at some point you give the signal to move against the queen, we'll be ready to assist. But letting the coronation happen still feels like we're legitimizing a lie. Ned pinched the bridge of his nose. We are. It's a matter of whether we endure that lie for a time to avoid an immediate war. Each of us has a stake. You, Renly, want to become king and skip over Stannis. But that alone might tear the realm apart. Stannis wants the throne by right of law. The Lannisters want Joffrey for obvious reasons. And I want to keep the bloodshed to a minimum, if that is at all possible. Silence fell as each man turned inward, wrestling with the moral and strategic quandary. Finally, Baelish spoke again. We have 3 days until the coronation. We might use that time to quietly approach the city watch captains, to gauge their loyalties. If the majority can be brought to stand with us, meaning with Lord Stark, then we have a chance to control the situation after the coronation, or even just before it if the queen tries anything rash. Varys offered a delicate nod. That does seem a prudent course. The gold cloaks often follow whomever pays them best. While the queen has Lannister gold, we have Peter's cunning with the treasury. It might be enough to tip the scales. Ned felt a pang of revulsion at the idea of bribing men who ought to serve the crown faithfully. But these were the realities of a city as corrupt and fractious as King's Landing. Very well, he said grimly. Peter, see what you can do to secure the watch. Varys, keep your little birds attuned to any sign of Lannister interference or Tywin's approach. Renly, keep your men in readiness but do nothing overt for now. We must avoid spooking the queen. Renly frowned but nodded reluctantly. Time is short, Ned. If you wait too long, you'll be stuck once Joffrey is crowned. Ned pressed his hands flat on the table. I know, but I'd rather set the pieces so that if we must move, we do so swiftly and decisively with minimal bloodshed. I'll do my part. I'll make a show of preparing for the coronation. Let the queen think I'm cooperating. Meanwhile, if Stannis is indeed making a move, perhaps we can intercept him with an offer, some compromise, anything that might stave off open war. Gods help me. I never thought I'd be juggling so many lies. Renly gave a rueful smile. This is the Game of Thrones, my lord, and you're playing it now, whether you like it or not. Ned dismissed them with final instructions to report any changes immediately. They departed, each wearing an expression of mounting tension. Alone in the solar, Ned sank into a chair, shoulders heavy. He had done everything he could to steer the path away from a direct confrontation. Yet here he was, plotting behind the scenes, bargaining with liars and schemers. Honor felt like a distant memory in this labyrinth of half-truths. Still, he reminded himself, thousands of lives might be saved if he could prevent a full-scale civil war. If the price was a temporary lie, so be it. He would swallow that bitter draft. He prayed the old gods would understand. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of cautious activity. The city's mood was restless. The great September bustled with preparations for the coronation. Tapestries were aired, flowers ordered, the streets cleaned in the more affluent districts, while the poor huddled as always in flea bottom. Joffrey was measured for royal vestments, and the queen oversaw every detail, from the color of the banners to the arrangement of the dais. Ned supervised the logistics, ensuring the new coins to be minted bore Joffrey's name, orchestrating the crier who would announce the occasion, managing the city watch's deployment so crowds could be contained. Behind the scenes, Baelish worked to sway the watch captains. He confided in Ned that certain sums of money had changed hands, certain debts forgiven. Varys reported rumors that some watchmen were already replaced with Lannister-loyal men. But not all. It was a race to see who would gain the majority's loyalty first. Renly quietly mustered a small group of knights from the Reach and the Stormlands who were in the city. Nothing overt, only a private muster in a hidden courtyard at night. They did not don their banners, merely sharpened their swords and waited for a call to action. Ned knew it was a slender reed, but it might be enough to stand against the Lannisters inside the city walls, at least for a time. On the eve of the coronation, Ned climbed the steps to the Tower of the Hand, his thoughts swirling. He found Sansa waiting for him in the foyer, eyes red from tears. Arya lingered behind a column, scowling. They had clearly quarreled. "What is it?" Ned asked gently. Sansa blurted, "We're supposed to go to the Great September tomorrow for the coronation. Joffrey wants me there in the front. But Arya says, she says terrible things, that it's all a sham." Arya piped up, arms crossed. "Because it is, father. He's not the real king, and Sansa is too blind to see it." Sansa whipped around. "He is so the real king. You're just jealous and rude." Ned raised a hand, his heart aching at their argument. "Arya, hush. Sansa, calm yourself. There are matters you do not fully understand. For now, we must keep the peace. We must attend the ceremony." Arya's expression darkened, but she fell silent. Sansa bit her lip. "Will you stand with Joffrey, father? Will you see him crowned?" Ned inhaled slowly. "I will be there, yes, as the hand must. I'll see you both escorted safely. You need not stand near him if it makes you uneasy, Arya. You can stay with Septa Mordain in the second row." Arya nodded sullenly. Sansa's tension eased slightly. Ned dismissed them with a weary sigh, ascending to his solar. Sleep came fitfully. He dreamed of a dire wolf entangled in a lion's trap, howling in pain. Morning dawned. The city was alive with the clang of bells. Banners snapped from every spire. Crowds gathered, jostling for a glimpse of the new king's procession to the great September. Lannister guards in crimson lined the route, joined by the city watch in black and gold. Ned dressed in formal attire, the pin of the hand gleaming on his doublet. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. The royal procession assembled in the Red Keep courtyard. Cersei wearing a gown of shimmering gold, Joffrey in deep crimson with a crown resting on a pillow. The King's Guard, minus Barristan Selmy who was unwell, escorted them. Jaime rode close, wearing the white cloak, eyes scanning. Tyrion arrived from somewhere, though he kept a low profile, watching with wry detachment. The lords and ladies of the court fell into line behind them. They rode through the throngs, cheers erupting from some corners, quiet from others. Joffrey kept his chin high, but his eyes darted nervously as if uncertain of his new station. Cersei rode with regal poise, occasionally waving a hand or letting her gaze pass over the crowds. Ned rode near the front, behind the queen, his expression grave. He spotted Peter Baelish further back, scanning the city watch formations, giving subtle nods. Renly was absent from the official party, citing a sudden illness. But Ned suspected he was lying in wait with his men, should something go awry. They reached the great September of Baylor, its white marble facade shining in the sunlight. The massive doors opened, revealing a vaulted interior filled with the glow of candles and the scent of incense. The high septon waited at the altar, clad in robes of crystal and gold. Nobles filed in, taking their seats in hushed anticipation. Musicians played a solemn anthem. Ned stood near the front, beside Cersei and Joffrey, as the ceremony began. The high septon intoned blessings upon House Baratheon, House Lannister, and the memory of King Robert. Cersei's expression flickered with something like sadness at the mention of her late husband, but it was gone in an instant. Joffrey stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight. When the time came to place the crown upon Joffrey's head, the high septon looked to Cersei, who produced the golden circlet. She lifted it high for all to see, then lowered it onto Joffrey's blonde curls. "All hail Joffrey of the houses Baratheon and Lannister," she declared, voice resonant in the marble hall. "King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm." A surge of cheers and applause came from the front rows. Lannister allies, no doubt. Others joined, some more timidly. Ned felt his chest constrict as he, too, forced himself to lift his hands and clap, just enough to be seen doing so. Sansa beamed through her tears in the stands, overjoyed for her beloved prince. Arya sat stiffly, arms folded. Joffrey turned, the crown gleaming. His face was flushed with excitement and perhaps fear. A page stepped forward with a scepter, which Joffrey took in his hand. The boy king raised it, voice breaking slightly. I vow to uphold the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, as my father did before me. I vow to be a just and merciful king. And," he stumbled, glancing at his mother, who nodded encouragement, "and I ask you, my loyal subjects, to serve me faithfully, as you did King Robert." Another round of scattered applause, more measured this time. Joffrey's eyes flicked to Ned. Something like uncertainty passed over his face. Then the boy gestured for the hand to come forward. Ned stepped up, heart pounding. Joffrey cleared his throat. "Lord Eddard Stark, you served my father loyally as his hand. Will you serve me as well?" In that moment, the entire realm seemed to hold its breath. Ned felt his stomach churn. He thought of Robert's dying plea, the Queen's ultimatum, Baelish's cunning plan, the threatened war. If he refused, blood might spill immediately. If he accepted, he legitimized a lie. Yet the only hope for a peaceful solution might lie in acceptance, for now. He bowed his head, voice steady but hollow. "I will serve, your grace, so long as you serve the realm." Joffrey blinked, then nodded, seemingly mollified. Cersei's tension eased visibly. The high septon led another prayer, and the ceremony concluded. As trumpets sounded, the new king processed out of the September, hand in hand with his mother, the courtiers trailing. Ned fell in behind them, mind whirling. The die was cast, for better or worse. Outside, the bells pealed joyously. People crowded to see the crowned boy. Ned saw a throng of small folk uncertain whether to cheer or remain silent. A few shouted, "Long live the king," and threw handfuls of petals. Others muttered or stared, unconvinced. Lannister guards formed a protective circle. As they mounted their horses for the ride back, Ned caught sight of Baelish sidling up to him. "Well done, my lord," Peter murmured. "No heads rolling today, at least. Let's see what tomorrow brings." Ned's only reply was a curt nod. He felt the weight of the new king's golden lie pressing on him, a burden that could break the realm if mishandled. The real challenges lay ahead. Stannis' inevitable move, Tywin's approach, Renly's ambitions, and the tension with the queen. He was living on borrowed time. He had used diplomacy and caution to stave off an immediate catastrophe, but how long could such a fragile peace last? The procession headed back up the hill to the Red Keep. Joffrey waved stiffly to the crowds, adjusting his crown every so often as if unsure it fit. Cersei rode beside him, posture regal, eyes scanning for threats. Ned kept behind them, flanked by the Kingsguard. The city watch saluted as they passed. Some wore the look of men who had just received a coin purse the night before. Others glared resentfully, perhaps suspecting betrayal in the air. They reached the keep. The heralds announced King Joffrey's triumphant return. Feasts were planned, celebrations intended to last late into the night. In the courtyard, Ned dismounted, turning to see Joffrey being helped down by a squire. The new king hesitated a moment, then approached Ned with an awkward stiffness. "Lord Stark," Joffrey said, voice carefully measured, "my mother says you're an honorable man. I want you to help me rule truly. If I do something wrong, you'll tell me?" Ned's heart clenched at the genuine note in Joffrey's voice. Was this fear speaking, or a moment of sincerity? "I will advise you, your grace," Ned answered, guarded. Joffrey nodded, swallowing. "Good. I don't want to be a bad king." Cersei stepped in, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder, her face soft with maternal pride. "You won't be. You have good people around you." Then her gaze locked on Ned. "Thank you, Lord Hand, for your cooperation today. The realm will remember." Ned gave a slight bow and said nothing, haunted by the knowledge that lies were now the foundation of this new reign. He turned to go, seeking the privacy of his solar, to prepare for what must come next. Yet as he ascended the steps to the Tower of the Hand, a cold wind swept over the courtyard, rustling the Lannister banners. Ned felt a deep foreboding that peace could not last long built upon such a fragile compromise. Across the Seven Kingdoms, the lords would stir, some plotting to support Stannis, some to raise Renly, others to remain loyal to King Joffrey. And in the shadows of the Red Keep, the Queen's secrets still loomed, a dagger pointed at the heart of the realm. Ned silently prayed he could keep them from each other's throats long enough to salvage the kingdom he loved. He had chosen diplomacy for better or worse. Now all he could do was walk that razor's edge and hope he would not be the first to fall. And as he reached the top of the stairs, a raven landed on the ledge, cawing once before flapping away. Ominous as an omen of war, an omen he dared not ignore. Ned Stark stood at the window of his solar, looking down upon the courtyards below. The day of Joffrey's coronation had come and gone, without immediate bloodshed at least. In the yard, Lannister guards stood at attention, red cloaks stirring in the breeze. Farther off, a contingent of the gold cloaks, newly reinforced with men whose loyalty had been bought or swayed, patrolled the walls. If not for the tension thrumming through every corridor of the Red Keep, one might have mistaken the scene for a typical day in King's Landing. But Ned knew better. War brewed just beneath the surface, ready to explode at the slightest misstep. Across the sea of rooftops, he glimpsed spires of the Great September and the sprawling city, narrow streets swarming with rumor and fear. News of Robert's death and Joffrey's ascension had traveled swiftly. The common folk whispered that King Robert's brother, Stannis, was gathering ships at Dragonstone, or that Renly Baratheon might yet stake his own claim. The city teetered on the edge of some great upheaval, and Ned felt the burden of it pressing against his chest. In the midst of his reverie, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Jory Castle standing in the doorway, looking concerned. "My lord," Jory said softly, bowing his head, "you asked me to keep watch on the Queen's movements. It seems she's sent several riders out of the city, headed west. They wore no royal livery, so I expect they're carrying messages for Lord Tywin, or perhaps the bannermen of the Westerlands." Ned exhaled. "They're securing alliances or calling in reinforcements. Have we had any word from Stannis? Or from your lady, my wife?" Jory shook his head. "No fresh word, my lord. Ravens continue to fly, but the replies are sparse. It seems everyone waits to see which way the winds will blow." Ned paced the floor, aware that time was slipping through his fingers. "We cannot keep waiting. If the Queen is summoning an army, I need to know how many men can be brought to bear in the city's defense, or how many might stand against us if it comes to that." He trailed off, recalling the uneasy arrangement struck with Baelish, to bribe the city watch to buy time, to prepare for a moment when truth might be revealed more safely. Yet each new hour gave the Lannisters more chance to fortify their position. He had hoped to postpone open conflict, but postponement alone was no guarantee of success. Jory studied his face. "What would you have me do, my lord?" "Continue as you have. Watch for any further signs of massing men. Keep me informed. We may need to act before Tywin arrives at the gates." As Jory left to carry out his orders, Ned sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. His thoughts churned around the question of what to do next. Before long, a soft knock sounded. Peter Baelish slipped into the solar, wearing a half-smile that betrayed nothing of his inner mind. "My dear Lord Stark," he said, dipping in a shallow bow. "I've only just received word that the City Watch captains have been amenable to my suggestions. Our coin has found purchase in their pockets. I trust this brightens your day." Ned lifted his gaze. "It offers some measure of relief, but I'm not fool enough to think them entirely reliable. They'll do what pays best, and the Lannisters have deeper coffers than we do." Baelish steepled his fingers. "True, but a coin in hand today can feel more real than the promise of future gold. We've at least tipped the scales in our favor somewhat. And how long until the Queen learns of your maneuvers?" A faint laugh escaped Baelish's lips. "She might suspect, yet suspicion alone cannot dislodge a man from power if he's holding enough threads. She's playing her part, ensuring Joffrey's enthronement is secure. We're playing ours, hoping to be ready if conflict arises." Then his smile faded. "But there's another matter, Lord Stark." Ned leaned forward. "Speak." Baelish clasped his hands. "Lord Renly has been making overtures again. He has assembled a small but significant band of knights in the city, men sworn to him personally or to House Baratheon through the Reach. He wants to know if you will back his claim, publicly or otherwise. He insists that skipping over Stannis would be wise. You know how rigid and unlikable Stannis can be, he says. Renly claims the realm would prefer a more genial king. Himself. Ned felt the familiar pang of conflict. "I cannot simply trample over the rightful laws of succession. Stannis is Robert's elder brother. By all the laws of the realm, he should be king if Joffrey is proven illegitimate." Baelish tilted his head. "That's your sense of honor speaking, dear lord. But consider, if Stannis arrives to claim the throne, the Lannisters will never accept him. The Tyrells might balk, the Martells might see an opportunity to press old grievances, and will plunge into war. Renly might garner enough popular support to prevent such a widespread rebellion." Ned's voice hardened. "Preventing war by ignoring the rightful heir is no true solution. Stannis may not be beloved, but he is legitimate under the law. And there is the crux of our dilemma," Baelish said mildly, neither arguing the point nor conceding it. "If you spurn Renly, he may attempt something desperate. If you champion Stannis, you know what that invites: an immediate clash with the Lannisters." He paused, tapping the arm of his chair. "I suppose you could remain neutral, wait for events to unfold." Ned almost laughed. A grim sound. Neutrality? That served no one. "I've been dancing on neutrality's edge this whole time, hoping to avoid catastrophe. Yet the longer I wait, the stronger Cersei's position grows. I'm half convinced that half measures only delay the inevitable." Baelish sighed. "We've 3 dire choices, Lord Stark. Joffrey, Stannis, or Renly. Each leads to war unless managed perfectly. And nothing in this realm ever goes perfectly." Silence weighed in the room. Ned recalled Robert's final wishes, and Cersei's demands, and the looming threat of Tywin's host. He'd hoped that by accepting the coronation temporarily, he might buy time to find a bloodless solution, but each passing hour chipped away at his hope. "If we are forced to move, it must be swift. Peter, continue your efforts with the Watch. Ensure they remain more loyal to me than the Queen. I'll speak with Renly again. Try to rein in his ambitions until we can find a path that doesn't end in slaughter." Baelish rose, giving a languid bow. "As you command. If I hear new tidings, you'll know at once." He slipped out as swiftly as he came, leaving Ned alone with his burdened thoughts. He spent part of the afternoon meeting with the small council, which was now led nominally by Joffrey, though the boy king seldom attended in full. The Queen sat in his stead, with Pycelle droning about harvest yields, Varys dropping careful hints about unrest in the Riverlands, and Baelish slyly confirming that the crown's debt continued to balloon. More than once, Cersei's eyes flicked to Ned, as if gauging his reaction. He kept his face impassive, nodding where appropriate, disagreeing politely when necessary. Their dance of wary politeness continued. When the meeting ended, Ned stepped out into the hall and found Tyrion Lannister waiting. The imp gave him a short bow. "Lord Stark, I understand congratulations are in order. Your show of support for my nephew's coronation was quite touching." Ned eyed Tyrion carefully. "I stood in my rightful place as the hand of the king." "Oh, quite." Tyrion's mouth quirked in a faint smile. "Only one might wonder if you do so begrudgingly. Then again, I'm sure you have your reasons." Ned's voice was tight. "If you have something to say, Lannister, say it." Tyrion cocked his head. "Very well. I won't mince words. I've noticed my sister's watchers lingering near your chambers more than usual. I suspect she's trying to glean whether you mean to remain loyal or if you're gathering allies against her. Whatever illusions of unity you displayed at the coronation, Cersei isn't one to trust easily." Ned grimaced. "That surprises no one." Tyrion sighed. "I tell you this not to threaten you but to caution you. My family has enough enemies, and I don't delight in further bloodshed. If you truly mean to keep the peace, well, I believe we might share a preference for avoiding reckless slaughter. Provided you don't push Cersei into a corner, she might yet deal with you more peacefully than you expect." Ned considered him. "So you counsel surrender or silence?" "I counsel practicality," Tyrion said with a sardonic shrug. "But you're a Stark, and practicality seldom suits your northern sense of honor. Still, take care, Lord Stark. My sister can be more dangerous than any wild beast in the Kingswood." With that, Tyrion bowed again and walked off, boots clicking on the marble floor. Ned wondered how much of that was genuine concern, and how much was Tyrion simply trying to read him. Likely both. He returned to the Tower of the Hand to find Renly Baratheon waiting for him, garbed in green with gold accents, a subtle echo of House Tyrell, with whom he was always friendly. 2 knights flanked him, wearing plain steel but carrying swords with the easy confidence of experienced warriors. They bowed stiffly. "Lord Stark," Renly said, as Ned dismissed the guards from his private sitting room. The 2 knights remained by the door, presumably sworn to keep an ear out. Renly wasted no time. "We must speak." Ned gestured to a chair. "Sit then." "What is it?" Renly fixed him with an earnest stare. "I cannot remain idle any longer. Stannis writes letters proclaiming himself the rightful king. He's sent ravens as far as Riverrun and Highgarden. More, I hear whispers that he'll sail soon for Storm's End to rally the Baratheon bannermen." He paused, voice taut. "Let me claim the throne first, Ned. Let me rally the Reach and the Stormlords. They'll follow me. My brother is too grim, too loveless, and the Southern Lords fear him. They won't rally to Stannis as readily as they would to me. We can strike quickly, arrest the Queen and Joffrey before Tywin's forces arrive." Ned gripped the arms of his chair. "And risk a civil war. Lannister men guard the Red Keep. They'll fight back. The Queen won't be taken easily, and if the Gold Cloaks turn on us, half the city could burn." Renly leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Half the city might burn anyway if the Lannisters consolidate power. Tywin isn't one to negotiate. He'll march on us, and the streets will run red. Right now, Joffrey sits the throne only through a deceit you and I both know to be true. If we do nothing, Stannis will come, and the clash between him and the Lannisters will be worse. You can broker a peace if you support me. Let me wear the crown. Keep Joffrey alive if necessary. He's just a boy. We can quietly set him aside." "That's still usurpation," Ned said, though the word tasted hollow. "Stannis is older. By law, it's his claim." Renly scowled. "Law? Gods, Ned, we're dealing with politics, with who can actually hold the throne without plunging the realm into endless war. Stannis might be lawful, but he'll face rebellion from the Tyrells, possibly the Martells, certainly the Lannisters. It will be chaos. Me, they might stomach. Ned passed a weary hand across his brow. You speak of risking lives. How many men will die for this cause? Even if you succeed, others will claim you stole the throne from Stannis. A flash of frustration crossed Renly's face. A smaller war now might spare a larger war later. You want to avoid bloodshed entirely, I understand. But that ship may have sailed with Robert's death. He leaned back. I'm sorry, Ned, but you must see that inaction is as risky as action. Ned closed his eyes for a moment. He saw Robert's face in his mind's eye, then thought of Cersei, Joffrey, Stannis, Tywin. Indeed, every path led to bloodshed in some form. What do you propose if I do support you? Renly spoke softly, quickly. I have a small company of knights within the city. We can seize Joffrey and his mother tonight, confine them to royal apartments under guard. Announce to the city that the boy's parentage is in question, that the Iron Throne passes lawfully to House Baratheon, specifically me. Our forces in the Reach and Storm's End will confirm the claim. The gold cloaks, many of whom are bought by Baelish on your behalf, will keep order. Tywin might rage, but without the queen to guide his grandsons, and without the city under his control, he loses leverage. Then we can negotiate a settlement. Offer Myrcella and Tommen a safe future, if Tywin stands down. Ned felt the enormity of it. If Renly's plan succeeded, the war might be short. But if it failed, the Lannisters would run rampant. And what of Stannis' reaction? Would he not challenge Renly's coup? That could spark another war, forcing each great house to choose between the two brothers. Yet Ned had no illusions about Stannis' personality. He was as rigid as the bones of the earth, and the lords of the Reach and the Stormlands might be less willing to back him willingly. At the same time, Ned's sense of honor balked at the idea of skipping a rightful heir. Even if he disliked the notion of crowning a child born of incest, he also balked at taking part in what might be seen as usurpation of a lawful Baratheon. Renly read the conflict in Ned's eyes and pressed on. If we wait for Stannis to sail, the window closes. By the time he marches, Tywin might already have reinforced King's Landing. Then we'll face a protracted war on two fronts: Lannisters versus Baratheons, and Baratheon versus Baratheon. The realm will be torn to pieces. I offer a swift strike now with minimal casualties. Ned stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the setting sun. The sky glowed a brilliant orange. I can't decide this alone, he said. I need more assurance that the Watch will side with us, that no massacre will occur the moment we seize the Queen and Joffrey. Peter Baelish claims to have bribed some captains, but some might remain loyal to the Queen or be bought back. It's a gamble. Renly rose as well, voice heated by urgency. Everything is a gamble, Lord Stark. I'll not wait forever. If you won't join me, I may act on my own. Ned pivoted, meeting Renly's eyes. If you do it without me, you'll lack the legitimacy of the Hand's endorsement. The people may view you as a rebel. That will only invite more chaos. Renly's jaw tightened. Then give me your endorsement. Ned considered the weight of that request, backing Renly in a naked power grab against both Joffrey and Stannis. It went against his sense of duty, but so did crowning a boy born of incest. Give me until tonight, he said at last. I'll confer with Baelish, and I'll decide. Renly exhaled in relief. Thank you. I'll await your answer. He gestured to the knights and stepped outside, leaving Ned alone once more with his turmoil. When the door had closed, Ned let out a long breath. He had hoped to forestall this moment, but the realm's fault lines were rapidly widening. Stannis, Joffrey, Renly, three possible kings, each claiming the throne. Perhaps more if word reached across the narrow sea to the exiled Targaryens. Ned steadied himself, then went in search of Peter Baelish. He found Baelish not in a brothel, as rumor might expect, but in the Red Keep's treasury offices. Littlefinger was reviewing ledgers with a bored expression, dictating instructions to a scribe. At Ned's approach, he dismissed the scribe and leaned back. Lord Stark, he greeted lightly, you look pale. Does the weight of all these coins and debts trouble you so? Ned braced his hands on the table, leaning in. Renly wants my answer by nightfall. He proposes we seize Cersei and Joffrey, place himself on the throne. Baelish arched a brow. Ah, so the good lord is finally ready to pounce. And how do you feel about joining his rebellion? Ned's jaw tightened. It's not a rebellion if Joffrey is illegitimate. Semantics, Baelish said with a wave of his hand. The question is, do you truly believe Renly can hold the throne without plunging the realm into war? Even if he arrests the queen, Jaime and Tywin won't simply roll over. And then there's Stannis to consider. Ned paced the small room. Renly insists that fewer men will die if we act quickly now. I'm not convinced. Baelish steepled his fingers, his face turning thoughtful. Renly has charm, that much is certain. And Highgarden might rally to him, especially if he woos Margaery Tyrell. Gods know the Tyrells have often thought her fit to be a queen. Stannis, on the other hand, has no such soft alliances. So yes, Renly might minimize the bloodshed, assuming you don't mind bending the law. Ned thought of Robert, how the man had broken Targaryen rule in the name of justice, and how that war had led to the sacking of King's Landing, the deaths of children. I mind, Ned muttered, but if I cling to the law, we get Stannis, and a likely clash with the Lannisters, Tyrells, and who knows who else. Baelish spread his hands, giving Ned a small, cunning smile. There is yet another option. Keep the lie going a while longer. You remain hand under Joffrey, but secretly build a coalition strong enough to impose your will later, whether that means crowning Stannis or backing Renly. Deceit, yes, but it might give you more time to position your pieces. No battles tonight, no forced arrests, no immediate civil war. Ned grimaced. I've already seen where that leads. With every day that passes, Cersei grows bolder. Tywin marches closer. We risk being overwhelmed. Baelish shrugged. A fair point. Perhaps the hour has come to pick a side for real. But which side? I've already told you. Crowning Joffrey now, he's just a boy, easy to manipulate. You could effectively rule through him if you had Cersei out of the way eventually. Crowning Renly might bring a swifter end if you can arrest the queen. Bringing Stannis means open war, but it's the lawful route. Ned's mind spun with the litany of bad options. He scraped a hand through his hair. What do you advise, Peter? You're a man of cunning. Which move is least likely to drown the realm in blood? Baelish actually looked pensive for a moment, which surprised Ned. Then he gave a shrug. If it were my choice, I'd keep the throne warm for Joffrey while quietly consolidating power behind the scenes. But you're not me. Your honor won't allow you to openly crown a bastard. So you must choose between Renly and Stannis, between a smaller war and a bigger one, perhaps. I would guess Renly's war is smaller, but the blow to your honor is larger, skipping the older brother. Ned's shoulders slumped. Gods be good. This is a wretched choice. Baelish's gaze flickered with a shade of sympathy. Such is the Game of Thrones. You might call it wretched, or you might see it as the art of compromise to spare lives. The question is, can your conscience bear it? He paused, tapping the ledger. And do remember, if you choose Renly, I'll help as best I can. But the Lannisters will know instantly who stands against them. We must strike hard and fast, or not at all. Ned's throat felt tight. I'll give Renly my answer tonight, he murmured, and Baelish inclined his head in acknowledgement. The sun was a dying ember when Ned left the treasury. Torchlight flickered along the Red Keep's corridors, and the hush of evening set in. Servants bustled with trays of bread and ale. A pair of Lannister guards saluted as Ned passed, their eyes watchful. He slipped onto a secluded balcony to gather his thoughts, where a breeze carried the scents of the city. Baking bread, distant smoke, and his conscience raged within him. Robert was gone, taken by a boar and too much wine. Joffrey wore the crown, but for how long? Stannis, by every law, should be king if the boy was not Robert's true son. Yet Stannis's rule might birth a war that devoured thousands. Renly offered a swift coup that might avert a larger catastrophe, yet would break the natural order of inheritance. Ned's sense of duty to the realm and his loyalty to the Baratheons warred with his sense of moral rightness. Every path was flawed. He felt footsteps behind him and turned to see Varys gliding forward. The spider bowed his head in polite greeting. "Lord Hand, the evening air suits you." Ned stared back warily. "I suppose it's no secret I needed to think." Varys clasped his hands. "Oh, secrets are rarely secret here. You've spoken with Lord Renly. You've spoken with Peter Baelish. No doubt you must choose your course soon. Dare I ask what you've decided?" Ned looked out over the city lights. "I'm still deciding, Lord Varys." The eunuch's voice took on a softer tone. "I cannot fault your caution. One man's hasty choice might set the kingdom ablaze. But wait too long and you lose the chance to shape events. You risk letting others force your hand." "I know," Ned said, voice ragged. "What would you have me do?" Varys's smile was faint. "Me? I only serve the realm. I serve the people who would suffer in a war. Sometimes the realm needs a stable, if imperfect, king rather than the rightful one, if that rightful one cannot hold the kingdom together. Such is our reality." Ned pressed his lips together, hearing echoes of Renly's argument. "So you counsel me to side with the brother who can keep the peace, even if it means disregarding the older brother's claim?" Varys spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Or perhaps you keep Joffrey, who is already crowned, and remove the queen's influence, shaping him into a kinder ruler. Or you invite Stannis in and dare to quell the Lannisters by force. Each option has costs. I fear all of them will lead to bloodshed one way or another. My only hope is that whichever path you choose, you strive to end the killing quickly." A wave of bitter resignation washed over Ned. "Sometimes I wonder if I could pack my family and ride north. Leave these intrigues behind." Varys lowered his gaze. "You know you cannot. The crown will not let you go, nor will the queen. The moment you try to leave, they would suspect betrayal. Your family would be in grave danger." Ned closed his eyes briefly. "Yes, I know." Varys placed a light hand on Ned's sleeve. "I wish you wisdom, Lord Stark. Our kingdom's fate may rest on what you do next." Then he bowed and slipped away into the twilight, leaving Ned on the balcony, tormented by the weight of his choice. At last, he turned and made for his private chambers. He ordered a humble meal of bread, cheese, and watered wine, forcing himself to eat. Each mouthful tasted like dust. He sent one of his men to request Lord Renly's presence for a final talk. If there was any last piece of reassurance or compromise Renly could offer, Ned wanted to hear it before deciding. Night fully descended. The Red Keep dark except for scattered torches and lanterns. Jory Castle returned with news that Renly was waiting in an antechamber down the hall, eager for Ned's word. Steeling himself, Ned set down his half-finished cup and walked out. Renly awaited him, perched on a bench against a wall hung with a tapestry depicting a hunting scene. He dismissed his knights to stand guard outside, leaving the two of them alone. The faint glow of a lantern outlined Renly's tense posture, his furrowed brow. "You summoned me, Lord Stark?" Renly asked, voice low. Ned nodded. "You wanted your answer tonight. I have thought long and hard." Renly stood. "And?" Ned inhaled. "I cannot in good conscience pass over Stannis's claim. He is Robert's elder brother. The line of inheritance is clear if Joffrey is proved illegitimate. I will not help you usurp him." Renly's face fell, though it hardened quickly into anger. "Gods, Ned, you cling to your precious law? Stannis might have the better legal claim, but a law doesn't win hearts. My approach would spare countless lives. We could settle this fast. Or spark a war with Stannis," Ned countered. "Not to mention the Lannisters. At least if I place my support behind Stannis, I can say I uphold the rightful heir. If Renly fights him, that is on your head, not mine." Renly looked at him in disbelief. "On my head? Stannis will never relent. Do you think he'll bend if the realm prefers me? He'll go to war or burn half the cities to get his throne. And what if the Lannisters align with one of us or decide to seize the chance to destroy both of us? You can't be so naive." Ned forced an even tone. "I know it may lead to war, but at least it's a war fought under the rule of law for the rightful claim. I cannot place the younger brother on the throne while the elder brother lives." With a choked laugh, Renly ran a hand through his dark hair. So you choose bloodshed for the sake of law. I never pegged you for such a purist, Ned. I tried to offer you a cleaner way. I know you did, Ned said quietly, pained by his own words. But I have to remain true to my oath. I'll write to Stannis, invite him to treat with me. If we can come to terms, perhaps we can remove Joffrey without a wider war. Even as he said it, it sounded desperate and uncertain. Renly shook his head. You forget what kind of man my brother is. He'll treat you with icy courtesy, then hammer the city with ships and armies if he thinks you hesitate. And the Lannisters, they won't surrender the throne easily. He took a moment to study Ned's face. Is there truly nothing I can say to sway you? We could act tonight, save thousands from the carnage to come. Ned closed his eyes. He saw in his mind's eye the image of Stannis, grim and unyielding, but also lawful. He recalled the Targaryen children murdered in the last rebellion, the city sacked. Was he about to condemn the realm to another spasm of violence? Yet the alternative was turning the law on its head. I'm sorry, Renly. My honor won't allow me to disinherit Stannis. Renly's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Ned saw raw hurt in his eyes. Hurt and disappointment. Then it hardened into resolve. Then you leave me no choice. Cannot wait. I'll gather my allies, do what I must. He looked Ned up and down. I only wish you would have joined me. We might have been friends, or at least allies. Ned managed a weary nod. If the day comes when you wear the crown, I pray it's through as little bloodshed as possible. Renly let out a hollow laugh. And I pray the same for you, if Stannis is the one crowned. He turned, cloak swirling behind him, and strode away. His knights, standing guard outside, fell in line, and they vanished into the darkness of the corridor. Ned stood alone in the antechamber, feeling older than his years. Each step of diplomacy had led him here, to this point where he had to choose between two flawed paths. He had chosen the letter of the law, the rightful claim of Stannis. Would it be his undoing? Would it be the realm's undoing? With a heavy heart, Ned returned to his solar, where the flickering candlelight offered little comfort. If Renly was truly preparing to move on his own, chaos might erupt sooner than expected. Yet Ned steeled himself. He would write to Stannis, urging a careful approach, and perhaps inviting him to King's Landing under terms of truce, though that seemed a faint hope. Stannis was not known for compromise. By the time Ned finished composing the letter, the hour was late. He sealed it with the direwolf sigil of House Stark, then summoned a loyal messenger to dispatch it at once. Perhaps it would reach Dragonstone in a few days. Perhaps it would be intercepted. There was no telling, but he had to try. Sleep was fitful. In his dreams, Winterfell stood abandoned, its halls echoing. Sansa and Arya called out to him, only to vanish into mist. Renly appeared, accusing him of choosing blood over peace. Then Stannis' stern face loomed, demanding why Ned had ever questioned his right to rule. When he awoke, his brow was damp with sweat, and the pre-dawn sky was streaked with a pale glow. He washed and dressed quickly, rousing himself for yet another day of tense uncertainty. A sense of urgency hummed in his veins. If Renly planned something drastic, it might happen soon, perhaps this very day. If so, Ned intended to stop it or at least mitigate the damage. But when he stepped into the corridor, he found it buzzing with alarmed servants and guards. Jory Castle hurried up, breathless. My lord, Renly is gone. Ned blinked. Gone. Jory nodded. He left the city in the night, along with his knights and whatever allies he had here. Rode out the main gates just before dawn, so the guards say. No explanation offered. He's vanished, presumably headed south to gather more support. Ned exhaled in a rush of relief and dread. So he's not seizing the city by force after all. He means to raise an army elsewhere. He rubbed his forehead, feeling a low pounding begin. Alert our men to remain vigilant. The queen must already know. He was correct. Cersei summoned him not an hour later. She was in her solar, tension written in every line of her posture. Jaime stood behind her in his Kingsguard whites, arms folded. Several Lannister guards lingered at the edges, as if expecting violence. Cersei's green eyes flickered with a mixture of apprehension and scorn. "Renly Baratheon has fled the city," she said at once. "Do you claim ignorance of this, Lord Stark?" Ned bowed stiffly. "I learned of it this morning, Your Grace. No one told me in advance. If he plans to gather an army, I am just as concerned as you." She studied his face, lips pursed. "He must have known we'd stop him if he tried to leave with an armed host. Yet we were not alerted until well after he was gone." Curious, almost as though someone turned a blind eye, Ned straightened. "Are you accusing me, Your Grace?" Jaime's scowl deepened, but Cersei raised a hand, halting his interjection. "Let us say I'm only suspicious, but if you claim no knowledge, so be it. Regardless, Renly is now a threat potentially as large as Stannis. That means war will come from both sides if these brothers can't be reasoned with." Ned forced calm into his voice. "Surely there's a way to negotiate. If Your Grace would extend an olive branch." Cersei gave a short laugh. "An olive branch? To a man who claims the throne for himself? This isn't a trifle, Lord Stark. My son is king of the Seven Kingdoms, whether Renly or Stannis choose to acknowledge it or not." She gestured sharply. "Jaime will see that our defenses are shored up. I expect the hand of the king to assist in that endeavor. Unless you have qualms about defending Joffrey's rule." Ned met her gaze, well aware she was taunting him to show disloyalty. "My duty as the Hand is to preserve peace in the realm," he said quietly. "If you wish me to fortify the city against invasion, I'll do so, but I still counsel trying to avert bloodshed if possible." Her expression hardened. "I won't surrender my child's throne. If Stannis and Renly want war, we'll give it to them." Jaime smiled thinly. "And we won't fight alone. My father marches with a large host. Once he's near, our position will be unassailable." Ned forced his voice to remain level. "Let us hope it does not come to a siege. The small folk will suffer most." Cersei's eyes flickered, but whether with concern or indifference he could not tell. War always brings suffering, better swift and decisive than drawn out and bloody. "Spoken like a true Lannister," Ned murmured, and her gaze flashed in warning. Quickly he bowed. "I'll see to the defenses." She dismissed him with a curt nod, already turning to Jaime for further instructions. Ned departed, heart pounding. Renly's departure had robbed him of one crisis, a coup in the night, but set the board for a larger, more dangerous conflict. Now Stannis would likely arrive by sea, Renly by land. Perhaps they would even fight each other. Meanwhile, the Lannisters braced for a siege, confident in Tywin's reinforcements. The entire realm stood on the precipice of chaos. Days melted into a tense pattern. Small council meetings, whispers in corridors, correspondences from the field reporting Tywin's slow but steady march. Robb Stark, Ned's son, was rumored to be calling banners in the north, fearing for his father's safety. Lisa Arryn kept the veil closed. The Riverlands were torn by rumors of skirmishes near Harrenhal. With each report, Ned felt the Seven Kingdoms fracturing around him. He tried to remain vigilant. Sansa and Arya stayed mostly within the Red Keep, protected by guards loyal to House Stark, though the Queen's eyes were everywhere. Joffrey made a show of drilling with the Kingsguard in the courtyard, flailing at practice dummies and occasionally barking commands at the gold cloaks. The Boy King seemed more afraid than truly proud of his new station. Each night, Ned pored over maps with a handful of trusted men. If Renly advanced from the south and Stannis landed near the city, King's Landing could face a two-pronged assault unless Tywin arrived in time. Ned desperately hoped one side or the other might stand down, but neither brother appeared likely to yield. One evening, a messenger from Dragonstone arrived with a short, curt letter addressed to Ned Stark. Stannis's words were brief, announcing that he claimed the throne as Robert's true heir, rejecting the bastard children of Cersei Lannister, and inviting Ned to declare his loyalty at once. No mention of negotiation, no hint of compromise, Just an ultimatum: join or be considered an enemy. Ned stared at the parchment by candlelight, heart sinking. Stannis was as unyielding as stone. In the days that followed, another wave of tidings arrived. Renly had been crowned by his supporters at Highgarden, naming himself King of the Seven Kingdoms. Word said the Tyrells welcomed him with open arms, forging an alliance through Margaery Tyrell's betrothal. Ned recognized the move for what it was: symbolic and strategic. The Tyrells commanded the breadbasket of Westeros, one of the richest regions. If the Queen heard this news, she'd double her readiness for war. So now there were 3 crowned kings: Joffrey in King's Landing, Renly in the south, and Stannis at Dragonstone. And somewhere far in the north, Robb Stark might be stirring, though he lacked a claim to the Iron Throne. His concern was presumably his father's safety and the North's independence. The realm had never been so close to tearing itself apart into 4 or 5 separate factions. Ned paced, sleepless, through the corridors at dawn's light, wondering if there was any last play to avoid a cataclysm. But each day, the city braced itself more fully for conflict. Barricades appeared near the gates, archers drilled along the walls. Tyrion Lannister oversaw a grand scheme of wildfire production, or so the rumors said, planning to unleash green flames on any assaulting navy. Varys whispered that the Queen's fear of Stannis' fleet drove her to desperate measures. And so Ned Stark realized, in a creeping moment of clarity, that all his attempts at diplomacy, delaying, negotiating, searching for common ground, had only forestalled, not prevented, the inevitable. The 7 kingdoms were sliding toward war. His choices now lay in how to minimize the slaughter, how to protect his own family, how to fulfill the promise he made to protect the realm from utter ruin. When he stood at the top of the walls, gazing down at the Blackwater rush below, he pictured a great fleet of ships with flaming catapults, the city gates besieged by Renly's cavalry, the chaos of small folk fleeing or rioting for bread. The summer sun baked the stones, yet Ned felt chilled. He had tried everything to avert this. Perhaps, he thought grimly, this was the best one could do in the so-called Game of Thrones. By time, mitigate bloodshed, and when the storm broke, guide the aftermath to a semblance of order. He lingered there for a long while, until the guards grew nervous at his stillness. At last, he turned and walked back into the Red Keep. He would not flee, nor would he close his eyes to what came next. War hovered on the horizon, unstoppable as the turning of the seasons. All he could do was stand firm, and, if he must, fight to defend the weak and uphold whatever scraps of honor remained in this darkening realm. That day, Joffrey summoned him for a formal meeting, flanked by Cersei and Jaime. The Child King had a freshly polished crown perched on his flaxen hair, and his voice quavered only slightly as he addressed Ned. "Lord Stark, my mother tells me you're making preparations for a siege. That's good. But I need you to ensure that if either of my traitor uncles shows up at our gates, they're turned away or dealt with." Ned inclined his head, feeling the heavy weight of the hand's badge. "Of course, Your Grace. The city will be defended." Joffrey looked vaguely relieved, though he tried to hide it. Cersei gave Ned a long, level stare. No doubt she wondered if his words were sincere. Jaime's hand rested on the pommel of his sword, as if reminding Ned of what lay in store for those who failed the crown. When the brief audience ended, Ned bowed and departed. Outside, he heard the distant clamor of blacksmiths forging swords, the lowing of oxen hauling barrels of grain into storehouses, the shuffle of peasants crowding outside the city walls, desperate for sanctuary they might not find. King's Landing was filling up with refugees from the countryside, fearing Lannister armies or Baratheon bannermen. Disease and hunger would follow soon enough. In his solar, he found Sansa by the window, her face tear-streaked. "Father," she said, turning, "they say war is coming. Do you think Joffrey, will he protect us? He's my betrothed. He mustn't he?" Ned's heart twisted at her innocence. "Yes, my sweetling," he said softly, not knowing whether it was true. "I'll do all in my power to keep you safe." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps it would be best if you and Arya left the city, went north or to the Vale. But I'm not sure the Queen would let you go." Her face paled. Leave Joffrey? But I'm to marry him. Am I not? Ned closed his eyes, wishing he could tell her the truth of Joffrey's parentage, the ugly coil of politics that threatened them all. But he couldn't burden his daughter with that. Nothing is certain now, he said. Pray to the gods that this ends quickly. His words brought her no comfort. She fled the solar, sobbing quietly. Moments later, Arya appeared in the corridor, watching her sister run off. She turned to Ned with a scowl. She's crying again over that stupid prince, Arya muttered. Father, can we leave? I hate this city. We should go home. Ned put a hand on her head, brushing back a stray strand of hair. I know, little one, but we have to stay a while longer. Arya's gray eyes burned with frustration. Why? Everyone here lies. He sighed. We stay to try and save them from lies turning into battles. I know it's hard. Arya clenched her fists. Fine, but I won't marry a prince if it means living with these awful people. I'd rather be a knight. A sad smile tugged at Ned's lips. Be whatever you wish, Arya. He hugged her gently, and she softened, resting her head against him before darting away. He watched her go, her ferocious spirit reminding him that some sparks of truth and courage still survived in this pit of deception. Night fell. The horns of the watch sounded thrice, echoing over stone ramparts. Ned sat before the fire in his chamber, turning a dagger over in his hands. A letter from Stannis lay on the table, accusing Ned of cowardice for not declaring support openly. Another, more recent letter from Renly, curt and resentful, reported he was marching north with a considerable host. Ned's head ached with the realization that soon, the host of Tywin Lannister might meet the host of Renly, with Stannis closing in by sea. All aimed at King's Landing, all hungry for the crown. He stared into the flames. So this is where all my caution has led, he thought grimly. Still, he clung to the notion that it could have been worse if he'd acted rashly from the start. If he had confronted the queen the moment he discovered her secret, the city might have exploded in violence weeks ago. At least now they had some supplies, some defenses, some measure of readiness. Perhaps fewer innocents would die. It was a small consolation. In the corridors outside, he heard footsteps, Jory Castle checking on the guard rotations. The castle had grown tense as a drawn bowstring. Servants walked briskly, seldom pausing to chatter. Members of the court disappeared into private corners, muttering conspiracies. The Queen and Jaime held court with the gold cloaks, presumably ensuring their loyalty again. Tyrion oversaw some hidden stockpile of wildfire. Baelish whispered with the city's merchants about new taxes for the war effort. Varys floated from room to room, gathering secrets no doubt. Ned set down the dagger, rising to his feet. He took one last glance at the flickering firelight. The realm stood on the threshold of a great and terrible conflict, and there was no path left that did not involve blood. He had done what he could, stretched diplomacy to its limits, avoided rashness. Now, if the day came for swords and shields, he would do his duty and hope that the realm might recover once the storm passed. Perhaps, if the gods were merciful, they would guide all these would-be kings to reason, or at least to a swift resolution. Yet deep in his heart, he feared that winter was truly coming, and its first herald would be war across the Seven Kingdoms. He whispered a silent prayer to the old gods for his family's safety, for the small folk caught in the crossfire, and for the chance to restore order when the fires of battle finally died. His words drifted into the hush of the night, unheeded by all but the wind. And so Ned Stark walked on through the shadowed halls of the Red Keep, a tired man carrying the last tattered hopes of peace within him, knowing that the next dawn could bring the roar of siege engines, the clash of steel, and the end of all diplomacy.